It's a commonly held misconception that the Earth is a spherical object that revolves around the Sun. But the fact is, of course, that the Earth is a circular dish surrounded by a barrier of ice that explorers like Andrea Barnes have been attempting to penetrate for centuries. In 1585, amid a storm of controversy and under cover of darkness, an adventurer by the name of Afton Marcella stole out of London in hopes of being the first to reach the edge of the Earth. But he was unprepared for the extreme conditions. His crew was plagued by scurvy and frostbite. Food supplies ran low. Marcella was forced to turn back before setting foot on Antarctica. So ended the first recorded expedition. But the controversy goes back much further than that. Since long before the dawn of recorded history, we've been trying to understand the world around us. And we've constantly turned to the sky for answers. By unlocking the keys to the stars, the sun, and the moon, it was reasoned, we would learn more about the Earth. So we've remained ever vigilant, turning both our persistence and our technology to the task at hand. But the conclusions have not always been particularly well thought out. 2,000 years ago, an Egyptian scholar by the name of Eratosthenes performed an experiment that he claimed proved the Earth to be a sphere. However, there are serious doubts about the accuracy of his data and his scientific procedures. Dr. Leo Ferrari explains.
Oh, the Eratosthenes experiment is an experiment supposedly conducted in the 1st century, whereby this ingenious person was supposed to have proved, I say that in quotes, that the Earth was a sphere of some 4,000 miles radius. Eratosthenes one day noticed that the sun was directly overhead in Syene, whereas he noticed that on the same day, at the same time, the sun made an angle of 7.2 degrees to the vertical at Alexandria, which was some 530 miles away. How did Eratosthenes in the 1st century know what the sun was doing on the same day in two places which are 530 miles apart? One can take all those same data, knowing that the Earth is flat. In one place you have the sun directly overhead, and at another place, at the same time, 530 miles away, let us suppose that it does make an angle of 7.2 degrees to the vertical. Then we have a right-angled triangle, which it can be easily shown that the sun is some 4,000 miles up in the sky. These superficial, even, considerations show that it's impossible. The whole thing, it's a story, a fairy story made up and mindlessly repeated in textbooks.
Fortunately, not all scientific arguments are based on such questionable research. The Greek astronomer Ptolemy determined to everyone's satisfaction that the Earth is flat, circular, and the central body in the universe. His theory went unchallenged for 1,200 years. Not surprising, really. One need only look around. And invariably, in any discussion about the shape of the Earth, the first argument used in support of its rotundity is that as ships sail out to sea, the tops of their masts are visible longer than the hull. This man, Samuel Burley Rowbottom, better known throughout the scientific community as Parallax. In 1881, he had published this book, Earth Not a Globe. Outlining dozens of experiments performed over many years, it quickly became the standard authority for anti-globularists. Perhaps the most significant experiments were those carried out on a canal known as the Old Bedford Level. Located in Cambridgeshire, England, the canal is perfectly straight over an uninterrupted 6-mile stretch. While there, Parallax conducted many experiments, all towards one conclusion, to prove that the surface of the water in the canal was indeed perfectly flat. In one experiment, a boat carrying a flag rowed from one bridge to another 6 miles away. An observer with a telescope placed 8 inches above the surface of the water found that the flag and the boat were distinctly visible throughout the entire distance. If the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 miles, then over a distance of 6 miles, the second bridge should mathematically be 16 feet below the observer's eye line. But in spite of the mathematical evidence, any further attempts to restore belief in the flat Earth seem doomed by one of the supposed great moments in modern scientific achievement. At last, after thousands of years of uncertainty, man was able to get far enough away from the Earth to have a good look at it in all its resplendent beauty.
So, rockets working in space. Never bought it myself. I propose that you need something to push against in order for propulsion. And since there's no atmosphere, it's a vacuum in space, there is nothing to push against. So I was going to start by showing this video of Apollo 11 launching to go to the moon back in 1969. This is the one with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. And you'll notice in this video that the rocket starts out ascending vertically, but as time goes on, it starts leveling out and flattening. And the reason they say that this happens is so that they can take advantage of the Earth's gravitational force, which gives them a slingshot effect to propel them into space, giving them a higher velocity to do so. Now, we are told that the reason we don't experience the force of us spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator is because we have this atmosphere that's kind of in sync with the rotational spin of the Earth. Therefore we don't feel anything. And since gravity is a constant, I don't buy the idea that they're using the gravitational force of the Earth to slingshot themselves anywhere. You can see now the rocket's levelling off, and you will not find a single video anywhere of any rocket ascending vertically, much less actually going into space, you know, leaving our atmosphere. None. You'll find none anywhere. You'll see that the altitude that's been superimposed onto the screen there at 25 kilometers roughly now, 26, 27, is increasing so quickly, even though the rocket is coming up to being completely horizontal. So it's horizontal now, and it's increasing in altitude: 40 kilometers, 41 kilometers, 42 kilometers, 43 kilometers. How can that be happening? So let's look at the textbook explanation of how rockets work, more specifically how they work in space. So I've got nothing against this guy. He obviously reads textbooks and absorbs the information within them, but like a lot of these people, they can't actually test these things for themselves. They rely on what they read and just accept it. So this guy is his name is Robert J. Dolby. He's a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, and he's also the curator of the Wernher von Braun Rocket Academy. So let's listen to what he has to say on the subject.
In this brief video, we're going to answer the question, what makes a rocket fly? Now that question refers to all rockets and all missiles. They are all the same in this regard, and the short answer is Newton's third law, which states, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Maybe you're thinking that's not helping your understanding very much at this stage and you want a little bit more detail. Okay, thinking caps on, pens and paper at the ready. I'm going to be asking questions later. Or do you feel that algebra and quadratic equations really aren't going to help you that much either? Okay, you're in good company. You'll find that there hasn't been a missile man or woman in the history of rocketry that has really understood why a rocket flies by looking at those kind of calculations and understanding the rocket equation. We actually get our understanding of how the rocket flies from a very simple understanding. It's related to that Newton's third law, and it's the reaction principle. Now the good news is the reaction principle is actually something that's easy to understand, because it turns out you're already very familiar with it. You might not be able to identify it and know what it is, but you're already very familiar with this idea of the reaction principle. Now, some of the times that you've thought about what makes a rocket fly, you may have got, if you're not already sure about how it works, you may have got a little bit confused by what you've seen. You may have seen, everyone has seen lots and lots of images of rockets taking off, and it's easy to think that there's a secondary action going on with the rocket pressing on the ground, and after it starts flying, you might start thinking that the rocket is somehow pushing on the air, and that's how it's moving. So it's not always absolutely 100% clear as human beings when we see something that we can actually see cause and effect. All we can ever really see is one type of event followed by another type of event, and we tend to actually then add the causal action based on what we've actually seen and other things that we're familiar with. So in any explanation, I'm going to go from things that you're already familiar with to something that maybe you're slightly less familiar with. So the reaction principle, it's something you've encountered in very simple terms. I think everyone's familiar with this example of the reaction principle. Here's an example everyone's seen, the lawn sprinkler. It's the reaction principle obeying Newton's third that makes it rotate. And you must have felt the shower head moving in your hand as you turn the tap on and off like this. Again, it's the rocket's reaction principle in action. The rocket motor, the jet from the rocket motor, isn't pushing on something. It's not pushing on the ground. It's not pushing on the air. It is the very expulsion of the jet from the rocket nozzle of the rocket motor that causes an instantaneous and simultaneous motion of the rocket in the opposite direction. Remember, this is Newton's third law in play, which is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the action in this particular example is the jet stream from the rocket nozzle, and the reaction is the movement of the rocket motor, and thereby the rocket body as well, in the opposite direction. And the beauty of that is, and the true power of the rocket, is that it can do this in the atmosphere of the Earth, it can do it underwater, believe it or not, and it can also do it in the vacuum of space. And it's specifically because it doesn't need to push on anything to be able to make its transit. And that's what makes the rocket fly.
Okay, let's have a look at the scientific method. This is one that I found on Wikipedia. It's as good as any, I guess. So at the top there, make observations. Well, I see rockets flying in Earth's atmosphere. I don't see rockets flying in space. Think of interesting questions. Do rockets work in space? Formulate hypotheses. What are general causes of the phenomenon I am wondering about? Well, perhaps rockets don't actually work in space, and that's why I don't experience the phenomenon of seeing them. Develop testable predictions. If my hypothesis is correct, then I expect A, B or C. Well, this is where we mere layfolk are most vulnerable, as it's virtually impossible for us to test. We have to rely on the big budget space agencies like NASA. The best we can do is observe and test what happens here on Earth, and to hypothesize about what would happen in space. So my hypothesis is that Newton's third law of motion needs a caveat. This being that only when a fulcrum is present, this being a mass for the action to act upon, will Newton's third law apply. If such a mass is not present, despite the presence of an action, then a reactionary force will not be observed. So gather test data. Relevant data can come from the literature, new observations or formal experiments. Thorough testing requires replication to verify results. So I'm going to show you my experiment in a few minutes. But before I do that, I just want to wrap up this scientific method, and we have to develop general theories, and the theories must be consistent with all other relevant data. So if you go to NASA's website and go to the rocket principles section, it says a rocket in its simplest form is a chamber enclosing a gas under pressure. A small opening at one end of the chamber allows the gas to escape, and in doing so provides a thrust that propels the rocket in the opposite direction. A good example of this is a balloon. Air inside a balloon is compressed by the balloon's rubber walls. The air pushes back so that the inward and outward pressing forces are balanced. When the nozzle is released, air escapes through it and the balloon is propelled in the opposite direction. Also from NASA's website, there's a downloadable PDF which is a simple experiment that you can do. It's aimed at children, to be fair, but as you can see here on this diagram, you get a straw and you pass a piece of string through the straw, I don't know, 5-6 meters long, tie the string off at both ends, attach a balloon to the underside of the straw with some tape and blow the balloon up and let it go. Obviously we know what the results of that will be, but this is going to be the basis of my experiments. NASA seem to advocate balloons on multiple pages as a good analogue for a rocket, so I thought I'd go with it. So Newton's third law in action. So now to the interesting part, because I'm going to demonstrate in this next test that a mass most certainly is required to make a rocket move, or a balloon move in this case. So I'm just going to put up on the screen again the quote that the guy made earlier that I asked you to remember. It doesn't need to be able to push on anything to make it transit, is what he says. So I've taken a piece of paper and I've wrapped it around the rear end of the balloon and taped it top and bottom. So the nozzle is sort of in the curve of the paper there. So when I let go, the air will still escape from the balloon at the same speed. The balloon will deflate as quick as it did without the paper. So according to his quote earlier, this should still move, this should still transit at the same speed, because it's not reliant upon it pushing on anything. It's the mere fact that air is released from the nozzle that provides the reactionary force to propel the balloon. So let's have a look at what happens. So Newton's third law experiment, test 2. Well, that didn't move very far. Let's try another one. So Newton's third law experiment number 3. Newton's third law experiment number 4. Not looking good. Okay, Newton's third law, 5th and final test. Come on, we've got to see some movement. Just to show that there's no restriction whatsoever. So going back to NASA's rocket principle page, if you scroll down, it says that one of the most commonly asked questions about rockets is how can they work in space when there's no air for them to push against? And this is my exact question. The answer to this question comes from the third law. Earlier on in the page it describes a skateboarder pushing away a skateboard with his foot, and describes the effect and the fact that the skateboard will move much further than what the pusher moves, and explains Newton's third law this way. So it says, imagine the skateboard again. on the ground, the only part air plays in the motions of the rider and the skateboard is to slow them down. Moving through the air causes friction, or as scientists call it, drag. The surrounding air impedes the action-reaction. So the only factor that they're saying that air has on the rocket is drag on the actual body of the rocket and friction, which causes it to slow down and not be as efficient. So they're saying, as a result, rockets actually work better in space than they do in air, because obviously there's no air to cause friction. As the exhaust gas leaves the rocket engine, it must push away the surrounding air. This uses up some of the energy of the rocket. In space, the exhaust gases can escape freely. So what it's saying is that in space, the expanding gas from the nozzle of the rocket doesn't have anything to push away on. It doesn't have to push away any air, thereby it's more efficient and actually works better. However, the whole premise that it doesn't need air in the first place is my whole problem with this law. As stated earlier, I believe it needs a fulcrum, or a point of leverage, for the rocket to work. So in the balloon experiment that I've just done, the reactionary force is in the opposite direction of the nozzle of the balloon. So the nozzle is at one end, at the rear, and the movement that we experienced in my first test was in the complete opposite direction. So that part of Newton's third law works. There is an equal and opposite reaction. However, it still needs that leverage in order for it to work. I would give the analogy of trying to do a pull-up. If you pull yourself up on a bar, you can lift your own body weight. The bar, in this case, is the point of leverage, the fulcrum. If you try to lift yourself up just by merely standing on the ground, and just grab yourself by the waist and try and lift yourself up, you can't do it. This is because there is no leverage point. You're pushing against yourself. This, in my mind, is a perfect analogy of what we just experienced with my balloon experiment. The balloon needed a fulcrum, something to push against, in order to make it move. Now you may have noticed that in a couple of the tests, the balloon actually rotated around the string, sort of radially, and this only further gives credence to my caveated addition to Newton's third law, because what was actually happening is the air escaping from the balloon was disrupted by the paper, and it was disrupted such that it was pushing air unequally from either side of the paper, because I haven't put the masking tape and the paper on exactly square, exactly perpendicular and centrally to the balloon nozzle. It created an imbalance, and it was pushing the air out of one side and caused it to rotate around the string, not in the direction that Newton's third law states that it should, which is the opposite direction to which the air is escaping. So let's wrap up the scientific method and see if there's any other theories out there that are consistent with our data that we've collected. So let's have a look at the rocket engine nozzle. And Wikipedia defines a rocket engine nozzle as a propelling nozzle used in a rocket engine to expand and accelerate the combustion gases produced by burning propellants so that the exhaust gases exit the nozzle at hypersonic velocities. Let's scroll down to atmospheric use. The optimal size of a rocket engine nozzle to be used within the atmosphere is achieved when the exit pressure equals ambient atmospheric pressure, which decreases with altitude. So atmospheric pressure is air pressure. So right there in that first sentence, they are saying that rocket nozzle design and efficiency of such is dependent upon the ambient atmospheric pressure, the air pressure, which decreases with altitude. So for rockets travelling from the Earth to orbit, a simple nozzle design is only optimal at one altitude, losing efficiency and wasting fuel at other altitudes. So what they're saying there is, in an ideal world, they would have a nozzle that changes its shape and its dynamics as altitude increases, because there's only, if it's a fixed shape, there's only one altitude at which it's at its optimal. So let's go down to the vacuum use. Now, the whole premise of this video is that I don't think rockets can work in a vacuum. So the first sentence that it says here, I think, is applicable if you remove the word vacuum, because it describes high altitude. So let's read it. For nozzles that are used in very high altitude, it is impossible to match ambient pressure. Rather, larger area ratio nozzles are usually more efficient. So right there they're saying that at high altitude the ambient air pressure is so negligible that they need to put much larger ratio nozzles on to account for the loss in air pressure. So again, air pressure is small at high altitude, therefore larger area ratio nozzles are more efficient. If you take this to its logical conclusion and traverse into space where air pressure is zero or very near to zero, how big or what area ratio nozzle are you going to need then? Would this be infinite? Do you see what I'm saying? So if we go back to look at what NASA claim on their Rocket Principles webpage, they claim on the ground the only, and I must stress that word that they use, the only part air plays in the motions of the rider and the skateboard, or in our case the rocket, is to slow them down. Moving through the air causes friction, or as scientists call it, drag. So they are claiming that the only part air plays with rockets on the ground in the Earth's atmosphere is the drag effect that's caused by friction on the body of the rocket itself. Nothing to do with the propellant dynamics. So they are claiming the exact opposite of what Wikipedia are telling us, because they're telling us that there's only one altitude at which a particular shape nozzle or size nozzle is optimal, and that they have to actually increase the nozzle ratio as altitude increases.
Second burn. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
He's in a roll, it appears, at this point. Does not. All right, we are in the box and ready to go. 10 seconds to release. Cross your fingers and say a prayer.
Okay, here we go, guys. It's real tough to see. Okay, tally ho the smoke. There he is, guys. He's on the climb.
He's riding the fingers of flame.
Look, you can see the flame.
Sky.
You can see the flame from here, Mike, or Jim.
Our webcast viewers are enjoying unprecedented camera coverage from the ground here. A radar-locked camera from Edwards Air Force Base tracking Spaceship One as it streaks through the sky to punch through the atmosphere and reach suborbital flight. "35 seconds, 135,000 feet into the flight."
Looking for an 87.
Appear to be a scripted maneuver.
Shut down. Come on, Mike.
We have shut down main engines to Spaceship One.
Still in the climb.
250,000 feet, still in the climb.
5 knots indicated, so feathers coming.
These are the tense moments, folks. Communications with Air Show Center here have been cut off, and we are waiting to hear from them that Mike Melville is okay. All systems are nominal.
Wow, look
There's
at that.
your downlink camera
Look
from
at that,
aboard
folks.
Spaceship One, looking down at the Earth.
330, they made it, Jim.
330,000 feet.
They made it. Yes.
$330,000, that would put them over the top.
Yep.
328,000 feet needed to achieve the required altitude of 62 miles, 100 kilometers.
You're going to have Virgin Galactic joining Virgin Atlantic as a way to spend your tourism dollars if you're stupidly rich.
But, you know, but the problem is, I think that's all a scam. But, you know, but the problem is, I think that's all a scam. Scam. I really do. I think I just got asked about this. The point is that it's exponentially, look, to go in Earth or near Earth orbit, you know, to go the distance between New York and Washington above the Earth, yeah, maybe private industry can do it, but it's just the laws of physics say it's just exponentially more expensive and exponentially more difficult to actually explore somewhere interesting.
Yeah.
And, and therefore, I don't think it's ever going to be. I don't think private industry is ever.
Of shock diamonds in its wake. At 2,200 miles per hour, the aircraft becomes superheated from the friction created as the air rushes by.
And indicating Mach 3.0 at this time.
When you go Mach 3, the amount of heat that the whole airframe, everything experiences all this heat, and nothing that they have at the store works. You know, there's no paint, no rubber, nothing. You know, metals, plastics, all this stuff is useless. And they just had to go through so many contortions to make every single part of the plane tolerant of these extreme temperatures.
Temperature affects everything on this airplane. The average person probably is not cognizant of that fact, but the faster you go, the harder things get.
One of the puzzles of extreme heat was never really solved.
Sealants for the fuel tanks. They never came up with a polymer that would seal the joints in the skin panels that hold the fuel in, so the blackbirds sit on the ground and weep. That seems silly. You can look, oh, these stupid guys back in the 60s didn't know what they were doing. There's still no plastic, you know, that can get to 700F and not turn into burnt hot dog oxide.
At an altitude of 30,000 feet, the X-1A is air-launched from the B-29. The plane begins its steep climb with rocket engines blasting it upward at supersonic speed. 4 minutes later, the X-1A was at 90,000 feet, a distance of almost 18 miles into the heavens. Major Murray has described his feeling upon reaching the tremendous altitude as one of incredible loneliness, especially when the skies darkened around him and the Earth's curvature became clearly visible. Yes, this is the X-1A. Its records of 1,650 miles per hour and 90,000 feet in altitude are more achievements in aviation science, and they will bring valuable data to be used in the tactical aircraft and guided missiles of the future for the nation's defense.
Quiet dawn to a big day, December 14th. For several months, the Air Force had been proud owner of the world's altitude record, set in May of 1958 by an F-104. It had quite a run for a modern record, but first a Russian T-431 and soon afterward a Navy F-4H sent it tumbling. The new Navy mark, 98,560 feet. The Air Force wanted to get it back, but odds were against it. No modern jet has ever been able to recapture its own record. The earthbound people keep watch. There he is, angling down after his swift high leap. He has been where no other man ever has. He's hacked it, beat the Russians by 1.5 miles, and the Navy by almost a mile. The new record, 103,395.5 feet.
Hi guys, this is Dr. Aeronautics. Here's a quick video of our great trip to 100,000 feet. This is actually a playback of me attempting to set the world altitude record. So basically I realized that reaching 100,000 feet is going to be a lot harder than I originally thought. So I figured the only way that we would be able to see this on YouTube without me recording 1,000,000 times over and dying of exhaustion was to record each one, and then when we got the successful one, go ahead and do that. So I've been trying for a long time, and today on my 4th attempt I set a record above 100,000 feet. And I was so excited when it happened that I started screaming yes like crazy. So I'm actually going to mute the microphone when we get there. But I'll just basically explain what I did as I try and find it. So let me go ahead and find the start of the zoom. Okay, so this is right before the zoom. First of all, we had an engine modification by a little bit to allow us to travel up to Mach 2.2 in spite of us not being okay usually at that temperature. We're also starting at 46,400 feet, which is the working number that I decided was good. And here is my countdown. 3, 2, 1, zoom.
Gentlemen, will you please take your seats so we can begin today's conference? I take a great deal of pleasure in presenting to you today as our guest speaker, Dr. Werner von Braun. Dr. Braun.
Gentlemen, the conquest of outer space is the greatest technological challenge of the age in which we live. The first decisive step in the conquest of space will be the placing of an object into an orbit wherein it will indefinitely circle the Earth. It takes a speed of approximately 18,000 miles per hour to accomplish this. And this is approximately 3 times the greatest speed ever attained by rockets today. How can we reach such a speed? First of all, of course, one could think of improving propellants used in present-day rockets. Secondly, we could shave some weights of our designs. But with both these methods, it does not appear possible to gain more than approximately 40 or 50% of the speeds that rockets reach today. A fundamental step ahead in increasing the speed would be the application of the multi-stage principle. Let us take a look at our first slide. Through the ballistic trajectory, you have weightlessness. Such a long 3-minute weightless ballistic parabola is shown in the upper part of this picture. The next slide shows what happens inside an airplane flown through such a ballistic trajectory. You see a little matchbox floating in the left upper corner of the canopy. This matchbox was released by the passenger in this flight and was photographed by him to show that the matchbox is actually floating freely in the canopy, and it floated there for approximately 40 seconds. In fact, pilots who have repeatedly flown through such ballistic trajectories even use such free-floating objects to make sure that they are right under the weightless condition. If they apply a positive or a negative lift, the matchbox will come up and down. If they have too little or too much thrust, so that they either under or overcompensate the aerodynamic drag, the matchbox will move fore or aft.
Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. Introduction. The various considerations which are set forth in the following pages seem, in the first place, to need an apology, in view of the fact that they completely revolutionize existing astronomical concepts. It may be said in this connection that scientific evolution, which does not specially aim at destroying previous supposed knowledge, although it does so in the end, is the result of the progressive influence of the age which makes it inevitable. And if the change, therefore, had not taken place today, it would unavoidably have occurred sooner or later in the course of time. The system of gravitation, which makes the sun the moving center of the universe, the awkward principles of which are anything but certain, since they apply to invisible circumstances, so that they cannot be checked, is here replaced by the old geocentric system, universally accepted until the 17th century, in view, of course, of its undisputable obviousness, and in which the Earth, in a state of immobility and surrounded by the planets visibly moving around it, including the Sun, is at the center of our universe. It has been said that there is nothing new under the sun, but it could be added, except the manner of interpreting those very facts, which, indeed, are not new. Thus, this system comprises two important features already known to the ancients, which had been inconsiderately discarded or even completely ignored, but which, by a different interpretation put on data obtained through certain modern discoveries, have been recognized to be absolutely true in spite of their apparent improbability. These two facts, which explain almost everything, are firstly, the positive existence above the Earth of a solid dome constituting the sky, and secondly, the non-material nature of the planets and constellations, which are not physical masses, but merely luminous manifestations without substance. These are the two circumstances which lead today to the fundamental transformation of astronomy. Further, the study of non-European cosmographies has provided a fresh outlook on the problem of the universe, and has furnished logical solutions to certain astronomical phenomena which could not be explained in the past. It is obvious that this work is incomplete, and also that it may be improved. It is therefore hoped that the assistance of various technicians, particularly in the field of optics, will help in due course to solve the remaining problems, as the important thing is not to try and prove one's infallibility, but to arrive at the truth. It is usual in the exposition of a new system to try and disprove the preceding theories which are now considered to be impracticable and obsolete, and it is to this end that the comments on gravitation and other hypotheses have been made. They should not be regarded as being directed against anyone in particular. The author acknowledges her indebtedness to all those who from the earliest times throughout the ages have, by their accumulated labor and efforts, made possible the realization of this work today. On the fact that the Earth does not rotate, and on the existence of a day and of a night cosmic breath stream. Copernicus had evolved another theory, which he also explains in his treatise on the revolution of the celestial spheres, that if a body is to revolve around another, the first one must have a spherical shape and rotate about its axis in the manner of a spinning top. Consequently, in order to make this notion fit in with the movement of the Earth around the sun, which he had devised in order to explain the seasons, he suddenly decreed that the Earth was round, contrary to the general opinion at the time, and then proclaimed that it had a movement of rotation about its axis. The great inconvenience in this proposition is that the rotation of the Earth cannot be seen to exist, either with regard to the position of the sun, or clouds during the day, or of the moon and other planets by night. On the other hand, the fact of the immobility of the Earth has an immense advantage over the theory of the rotation, in that it can positively be recognized as such, and it can safely be said that if the Earth cannot be seen to move, there are 100 chances in 100 that it does not do so. The theory of the rotation of the Earth, however, may once for all be definitely disposed of as impracticable by pointing out the following inadvertence. It is said that the rotation takes 24 hours, and that its speed is uniform, in which case necessarily days and nights should have an identical duration of 12 hours each all the year round. The sun should invariably rise in the morning and set in the evening at the same hours, with the result that it would be the equinox every day from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. One should stop and reflect on this before saying that the Earth has a movement of rotation. How does the system of gravitation account for the seasonal variations in the lengths of days and nights, if the Earth rotates at a uniform speed in 24 hours? At all events, we have previously seen that there is no such movement, as the revolution of the Earth round the sun, and as the rotation was its sine qua non, it automatically fails at the same time. There is also reciprocal invalidity. If the rotation is manifestly impossible, as demonstrated above, the translation which was uniquely derived from this movement becomes void. Further, if flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the Earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the Earth's rotation. The distance covered by an aircraft would be reduced or increased by the speed of the rotation according to whether such aircraft traveled in the same direction or against it. Thus, if the Earth rotates, as it is said, at 1,000 kilometers an hour, and a plane flies in the same direction at only 500 kilometers, it is obvious that its place of destination will be farther removed every minute. And on the other hand, if flying took place in the direction opposite to that of the rotation, a distance of 1,500 kilometers would be covered in 1 hour, instead of 500, since the speed of the rotation is to be added to that of the plane. It could also be pointed out that such a flying speed of 1,000 kilometers an hour, which is supposed to be that of the Earth's rotation, has recently been achieved, so that an aircraft flying at this rate in the same direction as that of the rotation could not cover any ground at all. It would remain suspended in mid-air over the spot from which it took off, since both speeds are equal. There would, in addition, be no need to fly from one place to another, situated on the same latitude. The aircraft could just rise and wait for the desired country to arrive in the ordinary course of the rotation, and then land, although it is difficult to see how any plane can manage to touch ground at all on an airfield which is slipping away at the rate of 1,000 kilometers an hour. It might certainly be useful to know what people who fly think of the rotation of the Earth. It could also be said that if the Earth did not rotate, such motion, as in the case of its assumed revolution round the Sun, would create in all directions apparent, fast, and erratic movements of the planets and constellations, whereas, in fact, the movements ruling in the heavens are extremely slow and perfectly orderly, and notwithstanding the artless explanation that has been offered, that everything goes so fast that nothing can be seen to move at all. It has also been endeavored to explain day and night, probably by way of giving an opportune and additional utility to the rotation, apart from its indispensable role in the assumed revolution round the Sun, by the fact that the two halves of the Earth are alternately exposed to the rays of the Sun in 24 hours. But day and night do not result from a play of light and shade caused by a turn of the Earth. As it can be realized by anyone, daylight is produced by the arrival and passage of the Sun, and night by the disappearance of it. It is daylight when the Sun rises, and night when it sets. There is no need at all for the Earth to revolve in order to create these facts of nature, the cause of which is evident and sufficient unto itself. A factor, however, other than the presence and absence of the Sun, might be taken into account in the alternation of day and night. It is known that the ancients insisted on the fact that day was caused by a luminous vapor, and night by an opaque sort of fog. But this explanation is not satisfactory as far as night is concerned, and the stars would not be visible, or at least they would be obscured. What may be assumed in reality is the presence of a warm cosmic breath during the day, and of a cold one during the night, to correspond respectively to the warm breath of the summer and the cold breath of the winter, as no doubt day and night are on a small scale what the two main divisions of the year are on a large one. There is, moreover, a noticeable increase of temperature after midday, which points to the existence of a breath in its phase of expiration. The passage of this breath of day would begin in the early morning and dawn, and the usual pause between inspiration and expiration taking place about midday. And we have in this connection the infallible test of the behavior of man, who by reflex action stops work at this moment for a time. The passage of the warm day breath would, then, end at dusk upon the arrival of the cold night breath stream. It might be considered that the breath of day has a certain luminosity in view of the fact that it is daylight long before sunrise, and also that the light persists after sunset, as well as during total eclipses of the sun. It can be seen from photographs taken during such eclipses that the details of the landscape, buildings, and objects remain visible, so that the presence of a luminous factor not dependent on the sun, but provided by the breath of a day, can be assumed. The cold breath of night would inversely flow from nightfall to dawn, with the usual intervals sometime after midnight. There is a sharp drop of temperature about this hour, which corresponds to the increased intensity of the cold night breath in its breathing out phase. There is an opposition in the circulation of the day and night breaths round the world, so that when one is north of the equator, the other is south of the equator, and vice versa. The day and night breaths are certainly connected with and influenced by the greater breaths of summer and winter, and it is therefore then combined actions which regulate the height of the sun and the hours of its rising and setting, but not directly, as said before, but through intermediate circumstances which are explained later on. As to the origin of these breath streams, it may only be surmised that they emanate from living cosmic centers possessing the organic function of respiration, and that they are situated in some distant regions outside our immediate universe. It is also possible that there may be a connection between the winds and these cosmic breaths. There are winds which prevail regularly during certain seasons of the year and which, under the circumstances, might correspond to the semi-yearly breaths of summer and winter. Further, high-flying American airmen have reported the existence of a vast, high-altitude current of air, 6 miles deep and 300 miles wide, circling at a fantastic speed round the northern hemisphere. And from Australia, similar reports indicate the presence of a corresponding high-velocity airstream south of the equator. There might be an analogy between these recently discovered air currents and the semi-annual cosmic breath streams. As to the breath of day, it might have a connection with the lesser winds which rise in the morning and drop in the evening. It would also appear that the breath streams are accompanied by vibrations or cosmic pulsations. The breaths of day and night by 12 pulsations each, which are the hours, and the semi-annual breaths of summer and winter by 6 great pulsations each, of a duration of 30 days. These are the months. It could be added that it is probably the regular and consistent flow of these cosmic breaths which constitutes the passage of time. On the revolution of the planets round the Earth. All of the planets, including the Sun, revolve round the Earth. These circumstances cannot be denied, since they are plainly visible, either in the ordinary with the naked eye or with the help of the telescope. It can be said, in this connection, that in the case of a science which should be based exclusively on observation and not on speculation such as astronomy, the evidence of the senses is the only factor upon which conclusions can, and must be, based. This method of investigation by means of the senses is neither primitive nor naive, as has been suggested. It is used in all existing sciences, except in occult research, where invisible phenomena are described as real, and exactly, it may be remarked, as in the case of the gravitation system. If the planets can be seen revolving round the Earth, it is for the decisive factor that they do revolve in such a way. It is asserted that this is not so, and it is maintained that the Earth and the planets revolve round the Sun. We note with astonishment, however, the bizarre and definitely suspicious fact that these planetary movements are not visible. They cannot be seen, and yet they are called real. How then can these movements be proved and their speed be ascertained, since they are invisible? On the other hand, the existing geocentric planetary motions which can be observed and measured, and which consequently constitute a perfectly valid system, are condemned as unreal and apparent. A pertinent remark may, incidentally, be made on the subject. Why do the astronomical tables which are published year after year give the so-called apparent movements of the planets in the zodiac? Why take the trouble of calculating and putting them on record at all if they are not real? Why is it also that no mention is made of the so-called real movements of the planets? To make sense, it would seem that it is just these and not the former which ought to be shown in official astronomical publications. A single example would be sufficient to prove that the laws of gravitation are not in conformity with existing circumstances. It is known that Mercury and Venus transit the face of the Sun on several occasions during the course of a century. These phenomena last several hours, and they are even observed with great interest by astronomers the world over, but without any special reaction, it seems, as to their material possibility. The shortest distance of Mercury from the Sun is said to be somewhere in the region of 50 million kilometers, and that of Venus 100 million kilometers. Consequently, if these two planets do really revolve the Sun, they cannot transit it except by means of an enormous distortion of their orbits, lasting several hours. This constitutes, therefore, a serious deviation from the laws of gravitation, and their impracticability is exposed. The transit of the Sun by Mercury and Venus is only possible through a general motion of revolution of these planets round a central point, which, in the circumstances, is the Earth. It is not either explained how the laws of gravitation manage to adapt themselves to the retrograde motions of the planets. Mercury several times per year retrogresses and becomes stationary altogether for a month. This also occurs less frequently, but at regular intervals, in the case of Venus and Mars, and for the heavier planets during much longer periods. These numerous and prolonged retrogradations, interruptions in the movements of the planet, ought therefore to dislocate the orbits and the speeds, since the movements around the Sun are supposed to be elliptical and uniform. But no mention is ever made of these difficulties. Another inconsistency can be pointed out. The fact that the planets move round the Earth is rejected on the strength that these revolutions are only apparent. But, on the other hand, the motion of the Moon round the Earth is accepted as real. There is, however, no difference whatsoever between the course of the moon and that of the other planets. They can be seen all together and at the same time moving round the earth. Why should it be decreed against all evidence that the moon alone does so? And what is the motive which underlies these illogical exceptions? Is it also possible to unravel in some way the tangle of the movements of the sun? Although it can be seen moving from east to west, an important portion has been excised here. It should probably read official statements from old encyclopedias have stated. Then it carries on with, the sun has retrogradations in the opposite direction at a speed of 1 degree per day, which signifies that it stays practically for 24 hours, 1 12-hour day and 1 12-hour night per year in the same part of the heavens. It is further retrograding also with the constellations by 50 seconds of a degree per year, at the present moment in the sign of Pisces, which thus becomes its domicile for a period of 2,160 years, which means that it will stay 72 years at each of the 30 degrees of this sign. It has an apparent motion from east to west of 1 degree and 4 minutes. It rotates on its axis in 24 days in the region of its equator, but in 25 days at the poles. It proceeds at a prodigious pace, and this its principal motion, in the direction of a particular spot of the sidereal expanse which has been identified as being the constellation of Hercules in the sign of Scorpio, which it will reach in X million years, while we learn from the astronomical ephemeris that it moves through this sign in its entirety every year from October 24th to November 23rd. End text. Back to the author. How can it be said that the sun, unless it is endowed with the faculty of ubiquity, is simultaneously invisibly present in different parts of the universe, moving forward and backward all at once, when it can be seen every day moving across the heavens above the earth? One is now able to understand the reasons why no reference at all is made to the movements of the sun in certain modern encyclopedias. Of all these multiple solar movements, nothing at all can be seen. The only thing that one does see, in fact, is that the sun rises in the east in the morning and sets in the west in the evening, having slowly moved across the dome of the sky during the day at the real speed, since it is observed and measured, of 1 degree per day. The sun has absolutely no other movement. To any well-balanced mind, the conclusion is that the system of gravitation, in view of all its contradictions and inconsistencies, is imaginary and not acceptable. Galileo's reaction in this connection may be recalled, when in a letter of the 4th of August, 1597 to Kepler, who was pressing him to support the new dogmas, he replied that he would not hesitate to do so if he were not afraid of being lauded with ridicule. It should also be remembered that principles of gravitation, such as they were definitely formulated by Newton in 1686, were not accepted into scientific circles, particularly in France, without resistance. The theory made its way only with the greatest difficulty, continuous objections being for a considerable time raised from all sides. It appears, however, that pressure and the policy of laissez-faire gave it a clear scope in the end. It would, nevertheless, be most instructive and interesting to read the contemporary comments on this question. The objection could be raised that masterminds, scientists, and academicians the world over have for nearly 300 years accepted these theories without hesitation, and that it is inconceivable that they could have been mistaken, or that they should have been deceived. Without meaning to cast any reflection on the intellectual faculties or on the judgment of these leading figures in the world of science, it can be said either that they were not competent in astronomical matters, a fact which does not constitute mental inferiority, or they lacked the moral courage to admit what they thought in their conscience of these incomprehensible abstractions, Galileo as well as the others. Without doubt he was convinced of the immobility of the earth, but he had to submit to the diktat of error in order to escape from the difficulties which would have assailed him till the end of his days, as he implied in one of his letters, if he had not given in. We repeat that all the planets, including the sun, whether their composition be material or not, revolve round the earth, which, as stated by traditional, immemorial, the word of Scripture, and the authority of the Church, is in a complete state of immobility at the center of our universe. The revolution of the planets takes place in a direction which we describe as from east to west, but it should be noted that in the paintings which cover the walls of very ancient Egyptian tombs, the sun is seen to rise in the west and set in the east. It is probably from this fact that Plato evolved his theory that during certain periods of time the revolution of the planets takes place in the opposite direction. But the rational explanation which can be attached to this supposed reversal of the planet's motion, assumed by Plato, is simply that the Greek geographers reproduced the maps of the world, as it was known in those days, the wrong way up, so that the poles and the 4 points of the compass were reversed, and this error would not be surprising considering the lack of accurate topographical information in those times. Thus, if a mistake has been made in the orientation of the Earth by the Greeks, the result would be that the southern hemisphere and its constellations is really the northern hemisphere, and vice versa. It should be noted that there are several maps dating from the Middle Ages where the Earth is shown in the manner of the ancient Egyptians, the opposite way up for us, and consequently France appears reversed at the north of England and Scotland, also reversed in what would be the austral hemisphere. The satellites of the Earth are also free from any movement of rotation. We can take, for instance, the case of the planet Jupiter, which is said to accomplish one complete rotation in 10 hours, so that its day and night have an equal duration of 5 hours. It can be observed, however, without a telescope, that there is no change whatsoever in the luminosity of this satellite all through the night, so that it does have a movement of rotation. Neither have the other satellites to which the same theory applies. It may also be remarked that the reverse side of the satellites cannot be seen, and this fact cannot be very well reconciled with the idea of a possible rotation. The stupendous invisible speeds which have been attributed to the satellites of the Earth are also fictitious. These latter move at the slow speeds, which can be observed and measured, and which, consequently, are real speeds.
The word firmament is derived from surface, and the French word cœlum, which signifies chiseled material. Chapter 4. On the solid dome of the sky. From the earliest times it has been believed and said that the heavens were not an empty space, but a solid surface. The Chaldeans and Egyptians regarded the sky as the massive cover of the world, and in India and Persia it was thought to be a metallic lid, flat or convex or even pyramidal. Up to the 17th century, the earth was always regarded as the center of an empty sphere with solid walls, and on this account it was always represented with a cover. This indispensable complement, however, was eliminated upon the advent of the theory of gravitation, for convenience sake, as a solid dome limiting the space around the earth would have rendered impossible the extravagant motions of the planets which were sent revolving in the air at phenomenal distances. Thus, from this time, the fact universally accepted for thousands of years that the sky is a firm surface completely disappeared. Nevertheless, the possible existence, it should be noted, however, that the notion of the massive nature of the sky still subsists in the language. The word firmament means ciel, which is derived from surface, and the French word from cœlum signifies chiseled material. The matter of a solid vault over the earth is a question of great importance in view of the tremendous consequences which would result from this fact, if it happened to be true. There is no doubt that the general reaction is one of incredulity, but on the other hand, it can be considered that it is not without reason that the ancients believed in the existence of the material vault of heaven, nor without reason either that this notion should have been consistently handed down through the ages since the earliest times up to the 17th century, in all parts of the world. The only alternative would be to be able to prove the fact, but it would certainly appear at the present time that there is no means of doing so. It may be discovered, however, that a solid dome effectively exists above our heads, in an indirect and quite unexpected manner, which the erroneous interpretation put on the composition of the planets had not so far permitted to do. It can be stated at this juncture, by anticipating on the next chapter which deals with this particular subject, that the planets are not solid, opaque masses of matter as is believed. They are simply immaterial, luminous, and transparent disks, and in view of these circumstances it is plain that the craters, asperities, mountains, and valleys which were thought to exist on the surface of these imaginary masses are in fact the topographic features of the solid vault of the sky, which are illuminated and thrown into relief by the luminous and transparent disks which we call planets. It is also to be realized that the lens of the telescope
creates an appearance of convexity which, standing out in relief, conveys the impression of a spherical mass. But this convexity effect is merely an optical illusion. The dome of the sky can be seen not only through the transparent satellite disks of the Earth with the help of the telescope, but also with the naked eye. In rare circumstances, it is true, when it is lighted by flashes of lightning during night thunderstorms. By a remarkable chance and in similar conditions, the author has seen the vault of heaven entirely illuminated, and has even been able to observe it steadily for several minutes, due to a rapid succession of sheet lightning discharges, providing a perfect and continuous visibility. The remark may now be made that if the ancients maintained that the sky was a solid mass, it was for the reason that they had ascertained the fact in the same circumstances, as many observers will now be able to do in the future. The possibility, therefore, of taking photographs by night of large areas of the vault of heaven can now be foreseen, particularly in those parts of the world where, owing to the frequency of thunderstorms, there are numerous opportunities of doing so. The aspect of the vault was that of a rather steep, slightly sloping dome of pyramidal shape, and it appeared to be composed of a bright metallic dark gray matter, uniformly showing small regular inequalities, like lead which has been beaten or chiseled. The larger details, particularly the craters, were clearly visible against the background, but the most impressive circumstance yet was the incredible nearness of the vault, the highest point of which did not appear to be at most any more than 60 kilometers from the earth. It may be recalled in this connection that in one of the texts of Homer it is stated that the height of the bell-shaped vault which surrounds the earth is only twice that of Mount Olympus. It results, therefore, from the foregoing explanations that the existence of a dome of matter encircling the earth cannot be denied, and this fact completely revolutionizes the present-day concepts on the outer world. The earth is not freely suspended in space, but it is resting on the floor of a cavity whose walls surround it on all sides. The sidereal expanse does no longer extend over unlimited and undetermined distances. The dimensions of our universe are now known to be restricted, and they are confined by the circular wall which encircles the earth. It is by this obstacle that the radar waves are reflected, and we may also recall, in this aspect, the theory of Heaviside leading to the existence of an upper, wave-resisting atmospheric layer, which is no other than the solid vault of the sky. There is absolutely no solid body between the earth and the dome of heaven, since the constellations, like the planets, are nothing but luminous phenomena. The meteorites are obviously fragments which became detached from the vault and reached the earth. These masses, when analyzed, prove to include a high percentage of metal, from which we can conclude that the inherent brilliance of the sky is due to the presence of metals in its composition. The fact is that the earth at the beginning of time must necessarily have become separated from the adjoining mass, which now constitutes the vault of heaven, and therefore the parts now divided must contain the same elements. All the metals and ores of the earth are consequently present in the surface of the sky. An association is actually made between metals and the sky, since the latter is instinctively compared to lead and copper in very hot countries where broiling temperatures intensify its metallic action and render it more perceptible. In classical literature, there are two specific references to the metallic nature of the sky, apart from the one to be found in Egyptian cosmology. But the former may not be independent of the latter. First, we read in the poems of Homer that star-strewn Olympus, dwelling of the gods, is made of glittering bronze, and secondly, in the Old Testament, the prophet Job gives what may be regarded as an exact definition of the sky when he proclaims it to be a mirror of metal. It is to be observed in this connection that when poetical reference is made to the silver mirror of the moon, it is the metallic surface of the dome appearing under the transparent disk which in reality may be described as a silver mirror. It may further be remarked that in the mythology of the Orient, the attribute of the sun goddess is the sacred mirror. This is another association with the true nature of the vault, and it must be admitted that the latter, especially when it shines and sparkles under the sun, undoubtedly looks like a mirror. It has frequently been observed that there is a resemblance between glass and the sun. In the 6th century BC, Empedocles regarded the sun as a vitreous body which collects and reflects the light of the ether, but has no luminous power of its own. The British astronomer Palmer in the last century held the view that the sun is a lens which he also said transmits to us the rays emanating from the Almighty. It is further known that Ptolemy, in his system of the constitution of the universe, speaks of the existence of a crystalline sky, i.e. a sky in the nature of a transparent mineral substance. One may think in this connection that it is not impossible that due to the heat developed by the passage of the sun's disk, there may be a fusion and vitrification of the siliceous materials contained in the vault, so that it becomes coated in certain places with a layer of glass, which would communicate to the solar disk by transparence, identical properties, so that it might become similar to a lens. The presence of dross or slag similar to that formed on fused metal has also been observed on the surface of the sun, which is really, owing to its transparence, the foundation of the sky, and this seems to confirm the possibility of thermal and chemical reactions taking place among the elements which compose the vault. It can now be understood that the light and the heat which appear to be produced by the sun do not proceed from this source, but are due to a burning glass effect, which is generated by the brilliant metallic surface of the vault under the luminous disk. Under these conditions, all the vivifying and beneficial properties which are attributed to the sun must be transferred to the solid dome of the sky, as well as the rays. These are not the sun's rays, but they are the rays of the metallic surface of the vault. It is also obvious that the electrical discharges which produce lightning take place between the mass of the earth and that of the dome of the sky. It can further be surmised that parts of the dome expand and split or explode under the stress of the passage of the intense electrical currents and of their discharge. Hence the short detonations called thunderclaps, which are later amplified into loud rumblings and reverberated in the interior of the vast cavern which contains the earth. It can further be remarked that crashes of thunder are always immediately followed by a metallic resonance similar to that of bronze or brass, and it can be said that this particular resounding, which is clearly perceptible, is certainly produced by the metallic walls of the vault, which are made to shake and vibrate under the stress of the detonations. The ancients have said that rain is part of the waters, which exist on the other side of the vault, and which pass onto this side through cracks. It may be remarked in this connection that rain is always discharged at the end of a thunderstorm, that is, after the sound of the splitting of the dome. Otherwise, the thunder has been heard, and this fact would seem to substantiate the theory of the ancients concerning rain. Lightning is a phenomenon which results from the electrification of the vault, but it must be explained that the luminous branches and ramifications which are observed in what is called forked lightning are not lightning at all. Strictly speaking, neither do they traverse the atmosphere as it is believed. They correspond to luminous electrical currents which travel in the vault of the sky itself, where they follow irregular tracks, probably metallic veins, and it can also be seen that they adopt the convex shape of the vault. These currents contribute eventually to the accumulation at a certain spot of the quantity of electricity which is required to cause a discharge towards the earth, then occurs in a direct line. The comets, meteors, and shooting stars are phenomena which also have their origin, like the so-called forked lightning, in the mass of the vault. The author definitely knows this to be the case. Comets are spontaneous luminous manifestations, which are created by electrical reactions occurring in the vault of the sky, and this explains their unexpected and sudden appearances, as well as their rapid and erratic movements, indifferently direct or retrograde. The passage of a comet is not accompanied by sound. That is to say that there is no electrical discharge like in the case of lightning, which causes the vault to split and detonate. It can be surmised that lightning takes place in the thickness of the vault, whereas a comet is a surface phenomenon. The orbit of comets, which may be seen to sweep across the vast expanse of the sky, is described as parabolic. This means, in fact, since the passage takes place on the surface of the dome, that the orbit follows exactly the curvature of same and acquires, therefore, a seemingly parabolic shape. The formation of comets seems to be due to the influence of the satellite disks of the Earth as they pass at certain points of the vault of the sky. Otherwise, when they occupy certain degrees of the zodiac, particularly the 29th degree of Sagittarius. In the case of Encke's comet of December 21st, 1795, the Sun was at the 29th degree of Sagittarius. In that of Rooke's comet of November 11, 1911, Mercury was passing at the same degree. And again for Donati's comet, October 2nd, 1858. It was Mars which was affecting its passage at this very spot. The same remark applies, moreover, to the 3rd degree of various signs, particularly Gemini. In the last case mentioned, that of Donati's comet, Uranus was at the 3rd degree of Gemini. For Halley's Comet, which returned on March 4th, 1910, Mercury was at the same degree, Venus at the 2nd degree of Libra, Mars at the 2nd degree of Cancer, while simultaneously Saturn passed at the 29th degree of Aries, etc. All these circumstances, which cannot be coincidences, point evidently to the existence of a mathematical law governing the formation of comets, through the combined agencies of the satellites when they pass simultaneously at various degrees of the zodiac. And since the satellites have a regular motion, it follows that the periodicity of comets, if it does exist, may be due to this fact. Shooting stars are not to be confused with the stars in the ordinary sense, which form the constellations and move at a very slow pace. They are luminous manifestations which glide rapidly on the surface of the vault of heaven, without any electrical discharge towards the earth. They are thus related to vault lightning, especially as they sometimes can be heard to emit crackling sounds like sparks. Meteors are also luminous phenomena resulting from electrical reactions which occur in the vault of the sky. It has been observed that they are frequently accompanied by detonations and by a sound similar to that of thunder, which is, therefore, caused by the splitting of the dome, so that there can be no doubt as to their real origin. It has been calculated that the height of meteors never exceeds 90 kilometers, and this figure confirms the estimate which is given further on of the probable distance of the vault of the sky from the surface of the earth. From the ancients, we know that the heavens at the beginning of time were adjacent to the earth, which is consistent with the primeval dislocation from the surrounding mass, and that they were progressively lifted in the course of ages. This rising of the vault could not have been very great. The mere fact that the latter can be seen through a telescope under the satellite disks of the earth, as well as with the unaided eye, as stated previously, indicates that it cannot be very far away. It is not true either that man's eyesight can cover an infinite distance, even with the help of the most powerful instruments, keeping in mind at the same time a possible magnifying effect due to the different densities of the various atmospheric layers, so that it must be accepted that the dome of the sky is incredibly low. If it were at an enormous distance, meteorites would disintegrate and become pulverized, and rain be volatilized before reaching the earth. There is not, and never will be, an absolutely reliable method whereby the exact distance separating the surface of the earth from the sky may be ascertained. It is very doubtful, as a matter of fact, whether the laws of physics which apply to terrestrial conditions would still be valid in the case of the upper atmosphere and of the spaces adjacent to the top of the dome, but certain data can be taken into account. The height of the Heaviside layer, which is the dome of the sky, has been measured by the time taken by radar waves to return to Earth. This distance has been given as being from 40 to 50 kilometers in the daytime and 90 kilometers during nighttime. But the figure obtained for the day may be considered unreliable, since it may well be believed that an acceleration takes place in the propagation of the waves due to the heat of the sun. It is known, on the other hand, that the thickness of the atmosphere has also been measured. But the atmosphere is invisible, and since the dome is the only surface on which the eye can rest, it is clear that the thickness of the atmosphere means the height of the dome. In the 11th century, the Arabs, by measuring the duration of twilight, assuming their method is acceptable, established that this thickness is 92 kilometers, and nowadays, by the same method, a figure of 64 kilometers has been obtained. A similar indication comes from Ceylon, where the inhabitants claim that the dome is there particularly low, being only 40 miles high, i.e. 60 kilometers from the earth, and it does not necessarily follow, whether this statement is based on conviction only or not, that it is untrue. This figure is also consistent with the impression of the author, who has seen and observed the dome of the sky during a sufficiently long period of time to enable its probable distance to be judged, as well as humanly possible. And the conclusion is that the distance separating the surface of the earth from the sky, and which may vary in some places, does not exceed 80 to 90 kilometers. The first telescope used by Galileo Galilei, which was of his own construction, had only a threefold magnifying power. Nevertheless, he could with this small instrument see the eminences of the vault, described by him as being the mountains of the moon. That is to say, that instead of saying 80 to 90 kilometers, 50 to 60 might be nearer the mark. The vault of the sky may not be absolutely rigid, but may at intervals alternately recede and advance, so that under these conditions the changes of atmospheric pressure, would obviously result from the varying heights of the vault. The azure color of the atmosphere may be due to the presence in the surface of the sky of certain metals or of their alloys, which provide a blue coloring matter, such as copper oxide or cobalt. This latter metal, particularly which is used for producing blue-colored glass, is found in very large quantities in meteorites, and its color could be diffused by the sun onto the atmospheric layers, even if they do not completely reach the top of the domes, as the latter could cast a reflection from a distance. It might also be inferred that the reddish tint of the transparent disk of Mars is due to the fact that the part of the dome which underlies its orbit contains iron oxide, which provides a compound of this color. On the immaterial nature of the satellites of the Earth. The satellites of the Earth are not masses of matter. They are luminous and transparent disks without substance. The Moon, in particular, conveys the impression of being an ethereal manifestation, and the uncertain and elusive character which is usually associated with this satellite results precisely from its immaterial nature. As already stated, the surface irregularities which were thought to exist on the imaginary masses, called planets, are those of the dome of the sky, such as they are seen through the transparent disks. The so-called mountains, craters, and depressions of the Moon are details of the structure of the dome. It may be remarked in this connection that the astronomers at the Mount Palomar Observatory in America have recently reported that striking alterations have taken place on the surface of the Moon. Gigantic craters and fissures of more than 500 kilometers are said to have appeared, and ranges of mountains as important as the Alps have disappeared without leaving a trace. But all those supposed alterations correspond clearly to the successive structural features of the dome, which are progressively revealed by the luminous and transparent disk of the Moon as it moves on. This explanation applies also in the case of Mars. The canals are most likely cracks, or maybe dark veins existing in the surface of the vault, which are seen through the disk. It has been observed that from time to time the canals multiply and change their form and their width, and that the dark regions called cases, which are also to be seen, expand or shrink. But, as already said above, these changes relate in fact to the gradual exposure of the vault structure under the advancing disk. The same remarks also apply to Jupiter, which is said to have undergone similar transformations. The notion that the satellites of the Earth are masses of matter, which originated with Aristotle in the 3rd century BC, has to be abandoned. There are no solid bodies traveling in space, and the use in the vocabulary of the word planet, which has this erroneous meaning, is no longer justified. It could further be said concerning the true composition of the satellites of the Earth, that it might have been discovered before today that the latter are not masses of matter, in view of the fact that they are able to remain at a standstill for several days, during the pause which follows their retrogradation, irrespective of whether they are held to revolve around the Earth or the Sun. It is obvious that during this time, the supposed compensating forces which are said to result from the movements of the planets, and thereby hold them in space, would cease to operate, due to the absence of motion. The only physical law to which the planets would then be subjected would be that of gravity, and, under the circumstances, they would normally be precipitated on Earth, or on the Sun as the case may be. The fact that the satellites are able to remain suspended in space for days during the stationary period which follows retrogradation indicates that they are not masses of matter, and that they can only be luminous manifestations, which fact is compatible with the impressive silence ruling in the heavens. It was recognized from the earliest times that the satellites of the Earth, particularly the Sun and the Moon, were not solid opaque bodies. They were first, until Aristotle, considered to be souls or spirits, which does not imply a physical nature. To the ancients, they were simply lights, and they gave the Sun and the Moon a very apt name. They called them luminaries. Xenophanes in the 6th century BC thought that the Sun was an accumulation of sparks resulting from the influence of the Earth. Several other physicists believed that it was a vitreous body, or a lens, reflecting the light of the ether, and this theory, which is based on observation as logical, considering that the metallic nature of the surface of the dome of the sky was probably unknown at that time. As for the moon, it is said that ages ago, long before the beginning of the Christian era, the Babylonian astronomer priests were teaching in their temples that it was a reflection of the earth. This supposition of reflection is exact, but that of the origin of the reflection is not, for the lunar disk, which is as perfectly circular as possible. It cannot be a reflection of the earth, since the earth is not round. Copernicus was the first to assign this shape to the earth in order to support the rotation. It should, moreover, be borne in mind that the circular shape which the earth appears to affect is merely due to the convexity of the dome of the sky, which bounds the horizon. The ancients have always said that the earth is flat, and this is confirmed by the photographic records of a large number of airmen, and also by the declaration of Professor Picard when he ascended into the stratosphere. It is further difficult to believe, as it has been explained, that the inhabitants of the antipodes, as a natural consequence of the rotundity of the earth, are able to stand and walk, feet on earth and head down in the manner of insects crawling on a ceiling. We may reasonably think that the inhabitants of the whole world walk in the same manner as we do, and on the same plane, which is the horizontal surface of the earth, and it is undoubtedly that which would be seen if Australia could be reached by television. Since concrete notions have now been obtained concerning the existence of a circular vault round the earth, it logically follows that the latter is a plane surface, apart, of course, from the irregularities of the mountains, which fills with the oceans the lower part of the cavity in which it is situated. The polar regions would, therefore, lie flat and extend to the base of some of the circular walls surrounding the earth. It would thus appear that the satellite disks are not reflections of the earth like the Babylonians believed in the case of the moon, since the earth is not round. They are either direct projections emanating from luminous centers, or reflections on the vault of the sky of primary luminous projections. It has been, in fact, said by the ancients, speaking of the sun, that it is only a reflection of a much greater and more powerful sun existing in an exterior universe. If either of these two alternatives is correct, the great difficulty, however, which still remains to be solved in a satisfactory manner, is the motion itself of the satellites. Now, in the course of research on light, the author has come across certain experiments carried out in the last century by French physicist Lissajous, whereby a spot of light reflected on a screen is made to move, simply by imparting a vibration to the surface from which this spot of light is reflected, and the experiments in question seem to supply the mechanism of the motion, including even retrogradation of reflected luminous projections on the vault of heaven corresponding to the disks. In these demonstrations, rays of light are allowed to fall on a mirror fixed to one branch of a tuning fork. The spot of light thus obtained is reflected from the mirror onto a second one similarly attached to another tuning fork, and from there again reflected on a screen. The screen in this comparison corresponds to the vault of the sky, and the spot of light to the various satellite disks of the earth. By letting either fork vibrate alone, the motion of its attached mirror will cause the spot to travel to and fro in a straight line on the screen. But on account of the persistence of vision, we see then an unbroken line of light. We now come to the important part of the demonstration. If the two forks with mirrors attached vibrate together, the spot of light then describes a curve, the form of which varies according to the rate of vibration. The continuous luminous curve is also created by a fast to and fro motion of the spot of light, like the straight line obtained previously by the vibration of one of the reflecting mirrors only. Under these conditions, the satellite disks of the earth may result from similar circumstances, i.e. two successive reflections, the last one onto the vault of the sky, of a primary luminous projection, the motion being automatically created, as well as the curved line of the orbit, by the vibratory modes of the surfaces from which they are reflected, as per the demonstration. If we suppose the existence of slow vibrations, the retrogradation which corresponds to the to and fro motion of the spot of light, as reflected on the screen, would be obtained. But in the case of the sun and the moon, which do not retrograde, the vibrations of the reflecting surfaces would be fast in order to conform to that part of the experiment, where due to the persistence of vision created by the rapidity of the vibrations, a continuous curve is produced. It would thus appear that since the results obtained by Lissajous reproduce the characteristics displayed by the satellite disks of the earth, as regards their origin and their motion, this explanation could be accepted. if experiments were carried out thereby ascertaining the suitable vibratory motions to be applied to the reflecting surfaces, it is probable that a complete reconstitution of the cosmic device could be effected. Before becoming aware of the Lissajous tests, which now seem conclusive, the author was of the opinion that the motion of the disk satellites of the Earth was due to a natural, although unexplainable, moving projection device, since the fast or slow, either direct or retrograde movements, as well as the period of immobility of the satellites, can all be reproduced by the mechanism of cinematography. As to the origin of the vibratory agents, the author's theory is that they result from a passage of the semi-annual and daily cosmic breath streams, of which they follow the increasing and decreasing phases. It is stated in the Hindu texts, to which reference has already been made, that the chariot of the sun becomes restless upon the arrival of dawn, signifying here the breath of day, which sets in motion, and this might indicate that the simultaneous vibrating of the two reflecting surfaces which determine the ascending and descending movement of the sun is produced and governed by the breath of day. It is in that case, there would be a new sun every morning, and this could perhaps explain the reason of its obvious weakness upon rising and setting. In the latter circumstance, the usual flickering which precedes the extinction of a light can readily be observed. The passage of the semi-annual increasing and decreasing summer and winter breath streams would also create in the reflecting surfaces correspondingly increasing and decreasing vibrations, affecting thus the yearly height of the sun. These hypotheses may only constitute an imperfect solution of the problem, but they may lead in the future, by means of suitable research and experiments, to a more concrete explanation. The origin and situation of the luminous projector centers would still have to be elucidated. Their size may be very small, but the projections would be greatly enlarged by the successive reflections, particularly the last one on the vault of the sky.
how God was hovering over the face of the water, the face of the waters. And God said,
Figlio di puttana, sai che tu sei un pezzo di merda? You think you're cool, right? When you kick out people over their house. But there is 1 of 3 Americans dying out of cancer, you know? Asshole. And you're gonna be one of those. I didn't do courage to kick your ass directly, because there's not courage for that. I could, you know. You know you're gonna have another accident? You know I'm involved with black magic? Fuck you. Die. Bastard. You think you're so cool, huh? Asshole.
They're in through sound. If the sound changes, the matter changes, the energy changes. So when you look at what it says in text, like even the Old Testament, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was sound. And sound is everything. When you think and feel, you create in sound. This is how the heart beats at a certain resonance. All you're looking at here are interacting frequencies making a beat. And so while the frequency of the heart is at the right level, it beats in the normal number of beats a minute. But when we become stressed, we affect that frequency and the heart beats faster. And so everything is sound, even the human heartbeat, and the interacting frequencies that make it happen.
In the water, as the frequency begins, every once in a while we'll reach a key threshold resonance, such as that moment right there. And in that key threshold resonance, the entire pattern morphed into a more complex expression of itself, simply because the frequency changed. Now watch what happens. The frequency is still increasing. Now watch what happens.
I led an expedition to the top of an Arctic mountain to study the northern lights.
or the aurora borealis as they're also known. Birkeland was a French scientist called Jean Lilliston, and it's a vacuum experiment. So what we have here is a vacuum chamber and a vacuum pump, which is a bit like a Hoover at home, and the vacuum pump sucks out most of the air out of the chamber. Not all of the air, but most of it. So it's recreating the conditions about 100 kilometers altitude where we see the aurora. Now inside this vacuum chamber you've got a big ball here that represents the sun, and a small ball over there that represents the earth. And within this small ball we have a really strong magnet recreating the Earth's magnetic field. The next thing we do is we put a voltage from the sun to the earth, and so we're drawing electrons from the sun towards the earth. Now this recreates the solar wind of charged particles that is always flowing away from our sun and into interplanetary space. Now when these solar wind, or when these charged particles come towards the earth, they get trapped onto the Earth's magnetic field lines and they get funneled into the northern and the southern polar regions. And when they get to the northern and southern polar regions, they collide with the gases that are there. And what they do, they excite these gases and they actually give energy to the electrons within them. When these electrons relax, they give out light at the characteristic frequencies, thus creating the aurora. That's basically how the aurora is created on Earth, and similar to how the aurora is created on all planets that have a magnetic field.
Maybe I should get myself a new tattoo. The liar, somebody who's known or someone who I admire. The liar, forget it, lady. That individual will move. The liar, be another liar. Mighty men with deadly heart disease.
These primary sources of light may be situated, as the ancients thought in the case of the sun, in an exterior universe communicating with the interior of the cavity, which contains the earth by means of openings, as early cosmogonies include many references to the existence of doors and windows in the vault of the sky. It is improbable that the exploration of sidereal space, as far as it can be carried, will ever permit to clear up the difficulty, or furnish information as to the situation of the vibrating surfaces from which the disks are reflected on the vault of the sky. It can also now be understood that, since they are reflections, the satellite disks of the Earth cannot, of their own, produce any sort of phenomenon, and if spots or shadows appear in their circumference, it is clear that these modifications occur in the first place either in the primary projector center or on the reflecting surfaces, or perhaps on the vault of the sky, and that these modifications are reproduced eventually in the interior of the disks. Circular currents moving at unequal speeds at various latitudes have been observed in the Sun, and as these appear to represent a rotary motion, it has been assumed that the latter rotates on its axis at a speed of 24 days in the region of its equator, and of 25 days in the case of its other latitudes. But it can be understood that these currents, or vortices, exist either in the primary projector center or in the reflecting surfaces, and that they are represented in the interior of the solar disk. Although these manifestations might also be due to the disk's motion on the reflecting convex walls of the sky. Some secondary satellites or moons are also said to have been discovered round the satellite disks of the Earth, but they can be assumed to be optical illusions, and that if they are not caused by a distortion of vision in the objective, they may result from a multiple refraction of the primary disk on the adjacent walls of the dome. It is necessary to recall what has previously been said concerning the short distance of the vault. Consequently, the luminous disks, called planets, which move on the latter, are also less than 100 kilometers from the Earth.
Hi guys, Flatwater back here. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is something that's been bothering me as of late, something I've been thinking about recently. The next thing that I've been thinking about is, what is the sun? How does it work? What really is it? The reason that I've been thinking about this is, in some of my documentaries you may have seen, I've covered this in earlier parts about how man can only get to 100,000 feet at the most, and that at anywhere near those altitudes, rockets and jets burn out every time, and so nobody can get up that high, and we can't get up near the sun, and nobody apparently knows what really it is. And I've recently put forth and agreed with the idea that it is a parabolic reflection. So this was recently laid out in the large movie that I did, that was the work with Paul Chief's work. So what I've done is, having looked at that now, I can see how this explanation explains how the sun works, but most importantly, it explains the seasons. This is the thing that's been tripping me up about the sun, is how does it create its corkscrew pattern around the pole? Because any type of a three-dimensional object that had to float through space in real time, or through actual space, would be a strange object doing that. It would be strange that it would be an actual object, and that it would be hanging and floating out in space like that for no particular reason. So a lot of things about the sun have puzzled me, and I guess other people, for millions of years, or correction, for thousands of years. So I agree now with this idea that it is a reflection within the parabolic dome of the dome, and I'm going to show you how it is and how it explains the seasons and the corkscrew pattern of the sun. Okay, so what you're looking at now is the pole beam, the beam that comes from the energy, the source that comes from the North Pole. I talked about this earlier, about that the North Pole, there's a lot more going on there than what they'll let us know, and this is why they blocked off the North Pole and the South Pole. So at the North Pole is a pyramid, or some sort of an object there, and it's the lodestone. It's the magnetic lodestone that is Mount Meru at the center of our Earth, and it is putting out a light source, or a power source, that's invisible through And this is what all the symbology of the pyramid is in the pole, in the center pole. And it's putting out all this energy straight up, and it may not be visible light to us when it's coming out of that beam. So as it goes up and hits on a reflector like a disco ball, is a great example of it, as it hits on that reflector and is shot parabolically at the edge of the dome, and it sticks to the dome. Because it's such a bright, powerful source, to us it appears to be a hot, real object, when really it's just the focused beam of light on the dome itself. So what you're looking at when you're looking at the sun is not a three-dimensional floating object. It is just light bouncing off the dome and being perfectly collected on the dome.
Now let's see the effect of a simple reflecting surface used to control light. The rays leave their source, strike the reflector, and bounce back on themselves in the same path. Then if we place a lens like this in the path of the light, the rays are bent inward. Now let's try another type of lens, similar to the lens used in automobile headlights. Instead of bringing the rays together at a point, this lens bends them so they go out in parallel lines.
In that spot. And so this is the reason that it explains the seasons perfectly. You know, it would have to be an up-down pattern on the dome to create the corkscrew effect that we see between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, between winter and summer. So what I'm going to show you now is how that works. As the beam that you see here is being beamed at the dome, and it's turning along the dome, you only have to adjust the height slightly on that beam to make the sun take a higher or lower position in the sky. And so this is the reason that it explains the seasons perfectly. You know, it would have to be an up-down pattern on the dome to create the corkscrew effect that we see between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, between winter and summer. So what I'm going to show you now is how that works. As the beam that you see here is being beamed at the dome, and it's turning along the dome, you only have to adjust the height slightly on that beam to make the sun take a higher or lower position in the sky, and therefore to us a more northern or more southern position. And so throughout the year it only has to fluctuate the tiniest bit, that beam, to make it arc all the way around the bowl, the inside of the bowl, much more easily. So I'm going to show you it here, just with a bowl and a light.
Okay guys, here we are. How you doing? This is Flatwater. You can see my home a little bit anyways. Alright, so this is our analog for the dome and our flat earth within it. So what I'm gonna do now, hello puppy, how you doing? What I'm gonna do now is show you guys the path of the sun along the bowl. I'm gonna show you it from the outside just because it's easier, and then I'll show you from the inside what the North Pole is doing and how the light is interacting and reflecting off the inside of the dome. So what the problem is here is that if the sun, if we consider that the top of the bowl here, this path would be the summer path, the tighter path of the sun happening in the summer. And then we've got the winter path as it widens its arc and takes a wider course around the flat earth. And that is how we experience summer and winter.
So the problem here is, if you have something, how is the sun connected to the North Pole? How is it hanging here? Where is it? Is it on the outside of the firmament? Is it on the inside of the firmament? Is it part of the firmament? What is it? How does it function? So, what we see here is the only way to get it to spin in a small arc and then somehow widen its arc is if it were on some sort of a mechanical gear that would affect the radius that it took. So what I'm proposing, what I believe now, is that the light is actually coming, the source of the light's power is coming directly from the North Pole, beaming straight up into some sort of a focal reflector here. And at that point, it's being shot into the inside of the dome. So you can picture that as it's coming up the center of the dome and being reflected, it only needs that slight reflection to take the summer course, and to adjust for the winter, that beam only needs to adjust the tiniest bit. It only needs to tilt down the tiniest bit from within inside the dome to affect the light and push it much further out towards the winter time path that we see. I'll just show you again quickly with the bowl from the inside, if I can get a grip on this here. So there's the bowl, there's the light source going straight up to the center, and you can see that that would cover the summer, and if the light is just slightly bent down by the reflector, it'll widen its arc, and we will experience wintertime. So it requires no, difficult mechanical apparatuses with gearing to change it. There would still be some gearing, but it would make such a smaller change necessary to make the actual course correction. So I hope that was simple enough for everybody. Thanks for watching, guys. Ciao.
Now let's see the effect of a simple reflecting surface used to control light. The rays leave their source, strike the reflector, and bounce back on themselves in the same path. Then if we place a lens like this in the path of the light, the rays are bent inward. Now let's try another type of lens, similar to the lens used in automobile headlights. Instead of bringing the rays together at a point, this lens bends them so they go out in parallel lines. A remarkable new device splits light into separate narrow rays so that the path of a beam can easily be followed. Notice that a light spreads out from its source in all directions. We can see how a mirror reflects light, how a prism bends the rays in different directions, Now let's see the effect of a simple reflecting surface used to control light. The rays leave their source, strike the reflector, and bounce back on themselves in the same path. Then if we place a lens like this in the path of the light, the rays are bent inward. Now let's try another type of lens, similar to the lens used in automobile headlights. Instead of bringing the rays together at a point, this lens bends them so they go out in parallel lines.
Chapter 6, on the action of the vault of heaven and on cosmic rays. It cannot be doubted that in virtue of its great mass and short distance from the earth, the vault of heaven exercises a powerful influence not only on the earth itself, but also on all it contains and everything living on its surface. The vault generates and discharges the energies which, under the name of cosmic waves, rays, or radiations, are day and night incessantly received from outer space. These waves are believed to emanate from the stars, although it has been observed that they also come from a direction where there are no stars at all, and this has given rise to the theory of the existence of invisible stars. But, necessarily, all radiations received from the exterior emanate from the vault of heaven. It may be thought that the latter, in a general way, acts on the climate and the temperature depending on its composition and distance. It may well be assumed that the very high temperatures of the equator are due to the fact that the vault is nearer the earth in this part of the world. The influence of the vault is principally exercised through the medium of the satellite disks of the earth moving on its surface, or by the particular action they exert on the latter. The disks stimulate and reveal its characteristics. We have seen, for instance, in this connection, that heat and light rays are developed by the vault under the sun. All the disks are conductors of the radiations which proceed from those parts of the vault which underlie the path of their orbit. And it may be understood that these radiations are not all of the same variety, nor do they have the same intensity, since the composition of the vault is likely to vary according to its height, and also that the nature, size, and speed of the disks are different. It is therefore due to this function of transmission of the radiations from the vault that the ancients had given the satellite disks of the earth the name of interpreters. It is now possible to assume that life, with its phases of incarnation, birth, growth, decay, and death, results from cycles combining earth energies and the cosmic forces which are received from the vault of the sky
through the medium of the satellite disks of the Earth. Another important feature concerning the vault is the fact whereby, taking into consideration the metallic nature of its surface, it must possess a hypnotic non-vibratory influence, which, it may be expected, participates with the earth energies and the cosmic forces in the phenomenon of life. It is also most probably this hypnotic action exerted on the earth throughout the day by the vault, which induces sleep at night. Insomnia would, therefore, mainly result from an insufficient exposure of the body to its influence during the day. The dome of heaven must also constitute an important factor of physical and mental well-being, particularly when its presence is known and kept in mind. The author knows that healers transmit the vital energies it contains, and also, incidentally, that these operate through the correspondence existing between the shape of the body and the shape of the heavens, of which man is a small replica. It has been said before today, in this connection, that the universe, signifying the heavens or the vault, is like the body of a man which, according to some texts, lies over the earth face downwards, with the head in the east and the other extremities in the west. A much deeper implication must, however, be attributed to the vault of heaven on the religious plane, since some of the cosmic energies it contains and radiates must definitely be regarded as divine. They are the universal gods, which were the object of primitive worship, and have since reappeared under different names in successive religions. It may be said at this point that the fact of knowing the true origin of the energies which create the religious complex in man does not in any way affect their divine nature, or prevent their being worshipped as in the past. On the contrary, the heavens and this word has a single meaning, which is that of the material and radiating vault which encircles the earth. It was therefore described as being the dwelling of the gods. In all early theologies, the vault itself, under the names of God the Father, Lord Almighty, was the supreme deity personified. For instance, in Greece, by Zeus, the god on high, of whom all the other gods were only parts or manifestations, meaning by this the various radiations which proceed from the different parts of the vault. The satellite disks of the earth, particularly the sun, were also regarded as gods, due to their revealing and communicating the divine energies. We are thus gradually led to identify the triad of divinities which form, in a more or less confused way, the basis of all religions. The first is obviously the vault of heaven, God the Father. The second is the Son, the true Savior of the world, classically described in early theologies as the Son, S-O-N. And since the third, or Holy Spirit, according to the theological definition, proceeds from the Father and is revealed by the Son, S-O-N, S-U-N, it is clear that the height and light rays, as well as other energies which proceed from the vault, or Father, such as they are revealed and communicated by the intermediary of the Son, otherwise the Son, corresponds to the rays or breath of the Holy Spirit. The Babylonian priests, astronomers, had identified 36 gods, or cosmic energies, which consequently emanate from 36 specific points of the vault, if the figure is exact. But in what way were they able to discover the existence of these energies or gods? Simply by observing the movements of the satellite disks of the earth on the vault, which they had to this end divided into 350 fixed degrees, 12 signs of 30 degrees, and recording the particular reactions, always the same, which the repeated passages of the disks over certain points of the vault infallibly determined in the behavior of man and in nature. In this way they could establish a systematic and accurate classification of the energies which are contained in the vault. These forces, considered as gods, were said to govern all terrestrial and human circumstances, including all diseases. It would thus appear that the cosmic rays emitted by a particular spot of the vault and personified by Ares, the god of war, through transmission by the disks, incite men and nations to fight one another. But when the disks, however, move away from the dangerous spot in the vault, and the influence is no longer transmitted, the desire for war dies away again. Or again, that the particular vault radiations personified by Apollo confer what is called innate, poetical, musical, or other artistic genius to the individual, and this by means of an exact geometrical relation called aspect, existing on the day of birth between their position of the disks and a determining point of the vault, say, in this instance, the 25th degree of Virgo. It may also be that the hypnotic action exercised by the vault compels man to blindly obey the cosmic impulsions such as they are received through the medium of the satellite disks of the Earth, but some of which it is said may be resisted. It should also be pointed out that since the heavens are in the shape of a man, it is presumable that all the waves they discharge, whether their length or speed of propagation, reproduce this pattern, and this has consequently led to the mythological belief that gods descend from heaven to earth to be born there as men, and also to the narratives of their discourses and actions in this world. On the immaterial nature of the satellites of the Earth. The satellites of the Earth are not masses of matter. They are luminous and transparent disks without substance. The moon, in particular, conveys the impression of being an ethereal manifestation, and the uncertain and elusive character which is usually associated with this satellite results precisely from its immaterial nature. As already stated, the surface irregularities which were thought to exist on the imaginary masses, called planets, are those of the dome of the sky, such as they are seen through the transparent disks. The so-called mountains, craters, and depressions of the moon are details of the structure of the dome. It may be remarked in this connection that the astronomers at the Mount Palomar Observatory in America have recently reported that striking alterations have taken place on the surface of the moon. Gigantic craters and fissures of more than 500 kilometers are said to have appeared, and ranges of mountains as important as the Alps have disappeared without leaving a trace. But all those supposed alterations correspond clearly to the successive structural features of the dome, which are progressively revealed by the luminous and transparent disk of the moon as it moves on. This explanation applies also in the case of Mars. The canals are most likely cracks, or maybe dark veins existing in the surface of the vault, which are seen through the disk. It has been observed that from time to time the canals multiply and change their form and their width, and that the dark regions called cases, which are also to be seen, expand or shrink. But, as already said above, these changes relate in fact to the gradual exposure of the vault structure under the advancing disk. The same remarks also apply to Jupiter, which is said to have undergone similar transformations. The notion that the satellites of the Earth are masses of matter, which originated with Aristotle in the 3rd century BC, has to be abandoned. There are no solid bodies traveling in space, and the use in the vocabulary of the word planet, which has this erroneous meaning, is no longer justified. It could further be said concerning the true composition of the satellites of the Earth, that it might have been discovered before today that the latter are not masses of matter, in view of the fact that they are able to remain at a standstill for several days, during the pause which follows their retrogradation, irrespective of whether they are held to revolve around the Earth or the Sun. It is obvious that during this time, the supposed compensating forces which are said to result from the movements of the planets, and thereby hold them in space, would cease to operate, due to the absence of motion. The only physical law to which the planets would then be subjected would be that of gravity, and, under the circumstances, they would normally be precipitated on Earth, or on the Sun as the case may be. The fact that the satellites are able to remain suspended in space for days during the stationary period which follows retrogradation indicates that they are not masses of matter, and that they can only be luminous manifestations, which fact is compatible with the impressive silence ruling in the heavens. It was recognized from the earliest times that the satellites of the Earth, particularly the Sun and the Moon, were not solid, opaque bodies. They were first, until Aristotle, considered to be souls or spirits, which does not imply a physical nature. To the ancients, they were simply lights, and they gave the Sun and the Moon a very apt name. They called them luminaries. Xenophanes in the 6th century BC thought that the Sun was an accumulation of sparks resulting from the influence of the Earth. Several other physicists believed that it was a vitreous body, or a lens, reflecting the light of the ether, and this theory, which is based on observation, is logical, considering that the metallic nature of the surface of the dome of the sky was probably unknown at that time. As for the moon, it is said that ages ago, long before the beginning of the Christian era, the Babylonian astronomer priests were teaching in their temples that it was a reflection of the Earth. This supposition of reflection is exact, but that of the origin of the reflection is not, for the lunar disk,
which is as perfectly circular as possible. It cannot be a reflection of the Earth, since the Earth is not round. Copernicus was the first to assign this shape to the Earth in order to support the rotation. It should, moreover, be borne in mind that the circular shape which the Earth appears to affect is merely due to the convexity of the dome of the sky which bounds the horizon. The ancients have always said that the Earth is flat, and this is confirmed by the photographic records of a large number of airmen, and also by the declaration of Professor Piccard when he ascended into the stratosphere. It is further difficult to believe, as it has been explained, that the inhabitants of the antipodes, as a natural consequence of the rotundity of the Earth, are able to stand and walk, feet on earth and head down in the manner of insects crawling on a ceiling. We may reasonably think that the inhabitants of the whole world walk in the same manner as we do, and on the same plane, which is the horizontal surface of the Earth, and it is undoubtedly that which would be seen if Australia could be reached by television. Since concrete notions have now been obtained concerning the existence of a circular vault round the Earth, it logically follows that the latter is a plane surface, apart, of course, from the irregularities of the mountains, which fills with the oceans the lower part of the cavity in which it is situated. The polar regions would, therefore, lie flat and extend to the base of some of the circular walls surrounding the Earth. It would thus appear that the satellite disks are not reflections of the Earth like the Babylonians believed in the case of the moon, since the Earth is not round. They are either direct projections emanating from luminous centers, or reflections on the vault of the sky of primary luminous projections. It has been, in fact, said by the ancients, speaking of the sun, that it is only a reflection of a much greater and more powerful sun existing in an exterior universe. If either of these two alternatives is correct, the great difficulty, however, which still remains to be solved in a satisfactory manner, is the motion itself of the satellites. Now, in the course of research on light, the author has come across certain experiments carried out in the last century by French physicist Lissajous, whereby a spot of light reflected on a screen is made to move, simply by imparting a vibration to the surface from which this spot of light is reflected, and the experiments in question seem to supply the mechanism of the motion, including even retrogradation of reflected luminous projections on the vault of heaven corresponding to the disks. In these demonstrations, rays of light are allowed to fall on a mirror fixed to one branch of a tuning fork. The spot of light thus obtained is reflected from the mirror onto a second one similarly attached to another tuning fork, and from there again reflected on a screen. The screen in this comparison corresponds to the vault of the sky, and the spot of light to the various satellite disks of the Earth. By letting either fork vibrate alone, the motion of its attached mirror will cause the spot to travel to and fro in a straight line on the screen. But on account of the persistence of vision, we see then an unbroken line of light. We now come to the important part of the demonstration. If the two forks with mirrors attached vibrate together, the spot of light then describes a curve, the form of which varies according to the rate of vibration. The continuous luminous curve is also created by a fast to and fro motion of the spot of light, like the straight line obtained previously by the vibration of one of the reflecting mirrors only. Under these conditions, the satellite disks of the Earth may result from similar circumstances, i.e. two successive reflections, the last one onto the vault of the sky, of a primary luminous projection, the motion being automatically created, as well as the curved line of the orbit, by the vibratory modes of the surfaces from which they are reflected, as per the demonstration. If we suppose the existence of slow vibrations, the retrogradation which corresponds to the to and fro motion of the spot of light, as reflected on the screen, would be obtained. But in the case of the sun and the moon, which do not retrograde, the vibrations of the reflecting surfaces would be fast in order to conform to that part of the experiment, where due to the persistence of vision created by the rapidity of the vibrations, a continuous curve is produced. It would thus appear that since the results obtained by Lissajous reproduce the characteristics displayed by the satellite disks of the Earth, as regards their origin and their motion, this explanation could be accepted. If experiments were carried out thereby ascertaining the suitable vibratory motions to be applied to the reflecting surfaces, it is probable that a complete reconstitution of the cosmic device could be effected. Before becoming aware of the Lissajous tests, which now seem conclusive, the author was of the opinion that the motion of the disk satellites of the Earth was due to a natural, although unexplainable, moving projection device, since the fast or slow, either direct or retrograde movements, as well as the period of immobility of the satellites, can all be reproduced by the mechanism of cinematography. As to the origin of the vibratory agents, the author's theory is that they result from a passage of the semi-annual and daily cosmic breath streams, of which they follow the increasing and decreasing phases. It is stated in the Hindu texts, to which reference has already been made, that the chariot of the sun becomes restless upon the arrival of dawn, signifying here the breath of day, which sets in motion, and this might indicate that the simultaneous vibrating of the two reflecting surfaces which determine the ascending and descending movement of the sun is produced and governed by the breath of day. It is in that case, there would be a new sun every morning, and this could perhaps explain the reason of its obvious weakness upon rising and setting. In the latter circumstance, the usual flickering which precedes the extinction of a light can readily be observed. The passage of the semi-annual increasing and decreasing summer and winter breath streams would also create in the reflecting surfaces correspondingly increasing and decreasing vibrations, affecting thus the yearly height of the sun. These hypotheses may only constitute an imperfect solution of the problem, but they may lead in the future, by means of suitable research and experiments, to a more concrete explanation. The origin and situation of the luminous projector centers would still have to be elucidated. Their size may be very small, but the projections would be greatly enlarged by the successive reflections, particularly the last one on the vault of the sky. These primary sources of light may be situated, as the ancients thought in the case of the sun, in an exterior universe communicating with the interior of the cavity which contains the earth by means of openings, as early cosmogonies include many references to the existence of doors and windows in the vault of the sky. It is improbable that the exploration of sidereal space, as far as it can be carried, will ever permit to clear up the difficulty, or furnish information as to the situation of the vibrating surfaces from which the disks are reflected on the vault of the sky. It can also now be understood that, since they are reflections, the satellite disks of the Earth cannot, of their own, produce any sort of phenomenon, and if spots or shadows appear in their circumference, it is clear that these modifications occur in the first place either in the primary projector center or on the reflecting surfaces, or perhaps on the vault of the sky, and that these modifications are reproduced eventually in the interior of the disks. Circular currents moving at unequal speeds at various latitudes have been observed in the sun, and as these appear to represent a rotary motion, it has been assumed that the latter rotates on its axis at a speed of 24 days in the region of its equator, and of 25 days in the case of its other latitudes. But it can be understood that these currents, or vortices, exist either in the primary projector center or in the reflecting surfaces, and that they are represented in the interior of the solar disk. Although these manifestations might also be due to the disk's motion on the reflecting convex walls of the sky. Some secondary satellites or moons are also said to have been discovered round the satellite disks of the Earth, but they can be assumed to be optical illusions, and that if they are not caused by a distortion of vision in the objective, they may result from a multiple refraction of the primary disk on the adjacent walls of the dome. It is necessary to recall what has previously been said concerning the short distance of the vault. Consequently, the luminous disks, called planets, which move on the latter, are also less than 100 kilometers from the Earth. Chapter 6. On the action of the vault of heaven and on cosmic rays. It cannot be doubted that in virtue of its great mass and short distance from the Earth, the vault of heaven exercises a powerful influence not only on the Earth itself, but also on all it contains and everything living on its surface. The vault generates and discharges the energies which, under the name of cosmic waves, rays, or radiations, are day and night incessantly received from outer space. These waves are believed to emanate from the stars, although it has been observed that they also come from a direction where there are no stars at all, and this has given rise to the theory of the existence of invisible stars. But, necessarily, all radiations received from the exterior emanate from the vault of heaven. It may be thought that the latter, in a general way, acts on the climate and the temperature depending on its composition and distance. it may well be assumed that the very high temperatures of the equator are due to the fact that the vault is nearer the Earth in this part of the world. The influence of the vault is principally exercised through the medium of the satellite disks of the Earth moving on its surface, by the particular motion or by the particular action they exert on the latter. The disks stimulate and reveal its characteristics. We have seen, for instance, in this connection, that heat and light rays are developed by the vault. It is therefore due to this function of transmission of the radiations from the vault that the ancients had given the satellite disks of the Earth the name of interpreters. It is now possible to assume that life, with its phases of incarnation, birth, growth, decay, and death, results from cycles combining Earth energies and the cosmic forces which are received from the vault of the sky through the medium of the satellite disks of the Earth. Another important feature concerning the vault is the fact whereby, taking into consideration the metallic nature of its surface, it must possess a hypnotic non-vibratory influence, which, it may be expected, participates with the Earth energies and the cosmic forces in the phenomenon of life. It is also most probably this hypnotic action exerted on the Earth throughout the day by the vault, which induces sleep at night. Insomnia would, therefore, mainly result from an insufficient exposure of the body to its influence during the day. The dome of heaven must also constitute an important factor of physical and mental well-being, particularly when its presence is known and kept in mind. The author knows that healers transmit the vital energies it contains, and also, incidentally, that these operate through the correspondence existing between the shape of the body and the shape of the heavens, of which man is a small replica. It has been said before today, in this connection, that the universe, signifying the heavens or the vault, is like the body of a man which, according to some texts, lies over the earth face downwards, with the head in the east and the other extremities in the west. A much deeper implication must, however, be attributed to the vault of heaven on the religious plane, since some of the cosmic energies it contains and radiates must definitely be regarded as divine. They are the universal gods, which were the object of primitive worship, and have since reappeared under different names in successive religions. It may be said at this point that the fact of knowing the true origin of the energies which create the religious complex in man does not in any way affect their divine nature, or prevent their being worshipped as in the past. On the contrary, the heavens and this word has a single meaning, which is that of the material and radiating vault which encircles the earth. It was therefore described as being the dwelling of the gods. In all early theologies, the vault itself, under the names of God the Father, Lord Almighty, was the supreme deity personified. For instance, in Greece, by Zeus, the god on high, of whom all the other gods were only parts or manifestations, meaning by this the various radiations which proceed from the different parts of the vault. The satellite disks of the earth, particularly the sun, were also regarded as gods, due to their revealing and communicating the divine energies. We are thus gradually led to identify the triad of divinities which form, in a more or less confused way, the basis of all religions. The first is obviously the vault of heaven, God the Father. The second is the Son, the true Savior of the world, classically described in early theologies as the Son, S-O-N. And since the third, or Holy Spirit, according to the theological definition, proceeds from the Father and is revealed by the Son, S-O-N, S-U-N, it is clear that the height and light rays, as well as other energies which proceed from the vault, or Father, such as they are revealed and communicated by the intermediary of the Son, otherwise the Son, corresponds to the rays or breath of the Holy Spirit. The Babylonian priests astronomers had identified 36 gods, or cosmic energies, which consequently emanate from 36 specific points of the vault, if the figure is exact. But in what way were they able to discover the existence of these energies or gods? Simply by observing the movements of the satellite disks of the earth on the vault, which they had to this end divided into 350 fixed degrees, 12 signs of 30 degrees, and recording the particular reactions, always the same, which the repeated passages of the disks over certain points of the vault infallibly determined in the behavior of man and in nature. In this way they could establish a systematic and accurate classification of the energies which are contained in the vault. These forces, considered as gods, were said to govern all terrestrial and human circumstances, including all diseases. It would thus appear that the cosmic rays emitted by a particular spot of the vault and personified by Ares, the god of war, through transmission by the discs, incite men and nations to fight one another. But when the discs, however, move away from the dangerous spot in the vault, and the influence is no longer transmitted, the desire for war dies away again. Or again, that the particular vault radiations personified by Apollo confer what is called innate, poetical, musical, or other artistic genius to the individual, and this by means of an exact geometrical relation called aspect, existing on the day of birth between their position of the discs and a determining point of the vault, say, in this instance, the 25th degree of Virgo. It may also be that the hypnotic action exercised by the vault compels man to blindly obey the cosmic impulsions, such as they are received through the medium of the satellite discs of the Earth, but some of which it is said may be resisted. It should also be pointed out that since the heavens are in the shape of a man, it is presumable that all the waves they discharge, whether their length or speed of propagation, reproduce this pattern, and this has consequently led to the mythological belief that gods descend from heaven to earth to be born there as men, and also to the narratives of their discourses and actions in this world. The reason was that Phaeton, after harnessing the horses to his father's chariot, could not drive it properly in its usual course, and it had practically destroyed everything on Earth. This description seems to refer to an accidental slowing down of the sun's speed, whereby the heat generated by the metallic surface of the vault would be increased to such an extent as to cause the disastrous consequences referred to above. The disks, which have been observed traveling in space, sometimes at very high speeds, and which are called flying saucers, are also luminous manifestations. It must be agreed that they resemble, except as far as the speeds are concerned, the satellite disks of the Earth, and they have the same origin, but it may be surmised in their case that either the primary projections are imperfect, or that the vibratory motions of the surfaces from which they are reflected on the vault of the sky are intermittent and irregular, thus producing short and erratic manifestations. It may be recalled that several observers who have seen flying disks from a short distance have described them as appearing to be metallic objects. That is to say that, here again, the vault of heaven is visible through the transparent disks. With regard to the cigar-shaped saucers which have been taken for spaceships, it is obvious that this oblong appearance merely represents a flattened disk. This deformation is presumably due to the shape of the vault, showing it thus at a different angle. There are two facts which are to be mentioned concerning flying saucers. Firstly, that practically all cases occur when Mercury, Venus, or Mars are either stationary or in slow motion, direct or retrograde. Secondly, that in all cases, invariably, the satellite disks affect a passage either at the 8th, 9th, 10th, 14th, or 20 and 21st degrees of any of the 12 signs of the zodiac, so that it is possible to forecast the approximate date of the appearance of a saucer by the perusal of astronomical tables. The rainbow is a greatly enlarged reprojection of the disk of the sun. It should be explained that only half of the iridescent border of the circle appears on the vault of the sky, but that the other half is always visible at the same time on the surface of the Earth, where it can only be observed with difficulty as it is on the horizontal plane. It is only from a height such as the top of a hill that the complete reprojection of the solar disk can be seen in its entirety. The decomposition of the light is, therefore, affected by the vitreous or metallic surface of the dome of the sky, acting in the circumstance as a prism. Chapter 8, on the phases of the moon and eclipses. The phases of the moon correspond to a 28-day eclipse, which starts after the full moon, and becomes total for a few days after the phase which is called the last quarter. The end of the eclipse is marked in succession by the reappearance of the new moon, followed by the first quarter, and the full moon corresponds to the end of the eclipse. The explanation which has been furnished that lunar eclipses are caused by the shadow which is cast by the Earth when the sun is situated behind it and in opposition to the moon is not to be retained. The phases of the moon which constitute a true eclipse of long duration are not caused by the fact that the sun remains 28 days behind the Earth and in opposition to the moon, any more than in the case of an eclipse of only a few minutes' duration. And even then are we warned, in order that such an eclipse can be explained, it is necessary to assume that the Earth has no atmosphere, which, considering existing circumstances, is not a very realistic proposition. It is also to be pointed out that the partisans of the system of gravitation show no scruples at all in having recourse to the geocentric system. Although condemned by them as unacceptable, in order to explain and calculate eclipses, as yet it would be useful to know whether the motion of a solar eclipse is at all real, since the motion of the sun in which the latter takes place is described as being only apparent. It is said that eclipses of the sun occur when the latter and the moon, which are considered as solid, opaque bodies, are in conjunction, thus producing an obscuration, and that in lunar eclipses the luminaries are in opposition to each other. But it must be remembered that the position of the sun, as based on an inexistent advance of 1 degree per day, has no connection whatever with true circumstances, and therefore the conclusions which have been drawn from this are false from the very beginning, in both cases of solar and lunar eclipses. We are also told in this respect that the black disk of the moon advances on the sun, and then recedes. But the moon is never retrograde. Why should it become so now and again for a few minutes just for the purpose of an eclipse of the sun? Further, the moon is not an opaque body, and moreover, as it moves on the vault of heaven, on the same surface as the sun, it cannot possibly pass between the latter and the earth. Eclipses are not caused either, as it might be inferred at first, by a partial or total temporary extinction of the projector center, thus provoking an interruption of luminosity on the corresponding surface of the projected disk. Since the latter is extant behind the shadow, its circumference remaining visible throughout the whole duration of the obscuration. For the author, eclipses are due to an optical effect obtained by a modification in the slant of the vault of the sky, thus determining an inclination of the disk. It can be readily understood that the convexity of the vault confers an apparent volume to the transparent disk, thus giving it an optical thickness, and it is just the reason why the sun has been compared to a lens. Therefore, following an inclination of the vault by the disk, a shadow could be cast in the latter by its own edge, as there is no doubt that eclipses are self-induced, i.e. that the sun and the moon cause their own eclipses, seeing that the obscuration occurs strictly within the limits of their circumference. As the luminous disk moves on, the optical circumstances being restored, the shadow is gradually eliminated. It is possible to effect an exact reconstitution of an eclipse by means of an ordinary magnifying glass representing the disk. It can be seen by holding this magnifying glass vertically and moving it slowly forward in the manner of the movement of the satellites that, by giving it a slight inclination, a shadow similar to that of an eclipse is cast in the interior of the magnifying glass by its edge, and without the interposition of any opaque obstacle. There exists further an evident and important feature which has been overlooked so far concerning the position of the other satellites of the Earth during eclipses. It can be readily observed that during these manifestations, certain zones of the vault are simultaneously aspected by the other satellites. The degrees in question are the 28th of Sagittarius, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th of Capricorn, the 14th through the 17th and the 21st of Virgo, and of Aquarius. There cannot be an eclipse of the sun or the moon on any one date without these degrees being simultaneously aspected by the other satellites, and it appears, consequently, that the combined influences of certain parts of the vault of the sky, which become sensitive by the passage of the satellite disks, contribute to the formation of eclipses. The correspondences between the longitudes of the disks and the true position of the sun or moon during eclipses should be systematically investigated in order to discover the connection. It may, however, be regarded as certain that eclipses are not due to any intercalary passages taking place between the sun, the moon, and the earth, nor to any shadow cast by the latter. The fact that eclipses of the sun occur in certain conditions at the time of the new moon must be regarded merely as coincidences between the cycle of solar eclipses. The periodicity of the moon and the movement of an X-point of the wheel of constellations, which in this work is held to be an immaterial structure supporting the luminous manifestations called stars. It is this X-point of the wheel of constellations which, moving with it at the speed of 1 degree per day, should replace the sun, which is supposed to move at this speed. It should be added that not only eclipses but also luminous manifestations as well as atmospheric and geological phenomena such as comets, flying saucers, falls of meteorites, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, inundations, tornadoes, and even thunderstorms, rain, and snow are always systematically accompanied by aspects formed by the satellite disks of the Earth with certain fixed degrees. It may be easily checked, for instance, that earthquakes only occur when there are simultaneous aspects within the 8th degree of Aries, the 10th of Capricorn, the 29th of Sagittarius, and the 2nd of Aquarius. This point would then pass in close conjunction with one of the lunar nodes at the time of the new moon. These coincidences permit effectively to calculate solar eclipses, but do not determine them. Natural manifestations should not necessarily be confused with their own causes, nor regarded as such. Chapter 9. On the Stars. There are definitely no solid bodies between the Earth and the dome of the sky. The stars are not masses of matter, and they do not result either from projections like the satellite disks of the Earth. Xenophanes, or Xenophanes, in the 6th century BC, thought that the humid exhalations of the Earth contained latent sparks which, after some sort of condensation, formed the stars, and this explanation appears to be acceptable. The astronomers of ancient Egypt believed also that the stars were suspended from the dome of the sky by cables like lamps, and the fact is that on very clear nights, filaments or lines connecting the stars of each constellation can be clearly distinguished. From this we may conclude that there exists above the Earth a network of ethereal cords, certain parts of which, particularly at the intersections, condense and retain permanently the radioactive emanations from the Earth, thus constituting the stars, in accordance with the theory of Xenophanes, or Xenophanes. This does not exclude the possibility of any effects resulting from the influence of the dome of the sky or from the presence of the sun during the days. It is also evident, since all the constellations are seen to move in bulk, that it is the frame or structure acting as their support which revolves and carries them along. It could further be surmised that this stellar network above the Earth is, at intervals, subjected to phases of tension and relaxation, which would have the effect of enlarging or reducing the size of interstellar spaces, and also that the volume of the Earth's radioactive emanations varies according to seasons or other causes, therefore increasing or diminishing the luminosity and the number of the stars. The stars are thus nearer the Earth than the satellite disks which move on the vault of the sky, and this fact is in accordance with the theory of both Anaximander or Parmenides. Concerning the supposed occultations of the stars by the moon, it can be said that it is not necessary that the latter should pass in front of a star to render it momentarily invisible, since the same result is achieved if the moon, the brighter light of which causes the disappearance of the star, passes at the back of it. When we speak of a stellar network or system, it is self-evident that there are two such networks, one over each half of the Earth, which possess different signs and constellations and meet over the equator. It can be observed that the constellations make a complete circle of that part of the heavens in which they are situated, in 1 year, which is equivalent to an approximate speed of 1 degree per day. And it is this advancing motion of the constellations of 1 degree per day which, for some incomprehensible reason, has been attributed to the sun. In our regions north of the equator, this movement takes place from west to east, in a direction opposite to that of the satellite disks of the Earth. As to the possible origin of the motion of the stars, this could be determined by a magnet action exercised by the metallic dome of the sky, or perhaps by the passage of the daily and semi-annual cosmic breath streams. It has been said that there exists a regular retrogression of the constellations of 50 seconds of degree per year, and that this movement was first noticed by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC, when comparing his notes with those which another observer, Timocris by name, had made 1.5 centuries beforehand. It would be necessary in the first place to know whether the calculations these two investigators made at an interval of 150 years are correct, and whether they must be accepted, which is by no means certain. But why, anyhow, has this retrogradation, which was visible and measurable in the time of Hipparchus, been mysteriously transformed through the ages into an invisible retrogradation? A difference of 50 seconds per year is appreciable over a length of time, as it amounts to 1 degree in 72 years, and it should by now, since the 2nd century BC, equal about 30 degrees. It is, however, impossible nowadays to see this considerable difference in longitude and in the position of the constellations. These always return to the exact spot they occupied in the heavens in the preceding years at a given instant. That is to say that this retrogradation which Hipparchus thought he had discovered does not exist. And if it does, why, considering the importance which is attached to it, doesn't it figure into the official astronomical publications? There is therefore no retrograde motion of the zodiacal signs over each other. Aries, actually presumably occupied by Taurus, is not in Pisces. Pisces is not in Aquarius, and etc. They are still in the same order at the place they occupied in the beginning of time. Further, the theory of the precession of the equinoctial point, which was derived from the supposed retrogradation of the constellations as extended to the sun, cannot be substantiated. Chapter 10. On the precession of the equinoctial point. This theory consists of 2 erroneous propositions concerning invisible and inexistent movements of the sun, and of a corollary which would be logical if it did not defeat the theory itself. In the first place, the sun, although its motion takes place in the reverse direction, is said to accompany the constellations and to progress with them at a speed of 1 degree per day, and in this way to cross the line of the equator twice a year, on the 21st of March and 22nd of September, at an equal distance from the poles, so that 1/2 of the earth receives the light of the sun, while the other half remains in darkness, a circumstance which determines the equinox, and for this reason the point of intersection where the sun is supposed to cross the equator is called the equinoctial point. But where, in the first place, is the need for the sun to pass on the line of the equator to create the equinox? This equal duration of day and night undoubtedly results from the undisputable fact whereby sunrise occurs exactly 12 hours after sunset. Why give an artificial cause to a circumstance of nature, when the origin of which is as clear as daylight? According to the second proposition, the sun, which the constellation is said to have a retrograde motion of 50 seconds of a degree per year. According to the second proposition, the sun, with the constellations, is said to have a retrograde motion of 50 seconds of a degree per year. We arrive now at the kernel of the theory whereby the sun, retrograding by 50 seconds a year, it follows that the point where it crosses the equator on March 21st and September 22nd also has a yearly retrograde motion, called precession, of an equal number of seconds. But in that case, the conditions required for the equinox cease to exist. It should be pointed out here, first, the theory should really be called precession of the equator. It is the equator which would have a retrograde motion, since it is on its line, that the point of intersection crossed by the sun, and called equinoctial, is situated. Further, the equal duration of day and night is said in this case to be only possible when the sun is on the line of the equator at an equal distance from the poles, whereby 1/2 of the earth receives the light of the sun, and the other remains in obscurity. Therefore, if the line of the equator on which the equinoctial point is situated moves backward, as in the precession, the sun when crossing this point will no longer be at an equal distance from the poles, and neither will have the 2 halves of the earth be identical. And an equal distribution of light and darkness over the earth would become impossible. This theory defeats its own end. It might also be added, incidentally, that at the moment of the equinoxes, on March 21st and September 22nd, the sun at midday reaches a point in the heavens which is equidistant from the culminating height reached during the summer solstice, and the lowest point attained during the winter solstice. Thus, to be intelligible, the height of the sun should, in the respective hemispheres, be measured on a horizontal line passing through this middle point reached by the sun at the equinox, and not on the line of the equator as is actually done. When, for the 6 months from the autumn to the spring equinox, i.e. March 21 to September 22, we find the paradox by which the height of the sun is shown as below the equator at midday. In the scheme of the precession, the sun is said to cross the equator nowadays at the 6th degree of the sign of Pisces, which corresponds to the 24th of February. It should therefore be the equinox on that day, after which the days should normally start on their habitual increase. In the way of nature, however, the equinox invariably takes place 26 days later, on March 21st, the days beginning to grow longer from that date. As this fact obviously upsets the precession theory, it is declared that this annual retrogradation of the equinoctial point, which latter is crossed by the sun in order to form an equinox, which equinox marks the beginning of spring, has no effect on the seasons, and it would also seem on the equinox itself. So one may ask in the end what the object of this riddle is at all, and why should any causes, even if they are invisible as in this case, be assigned to circumstances which fail to materialize. It can thus be seen from the few remarks made above that the theory of the precession of the equinoctial point is an entirely artificial arrangement, which, once unraveled and scrutinized, cannot be taken into account. Chapter 11, on the formation and the age of the Earth. The formation of the Earth has resulted logically from its dislocation from the surrounding mass of matter, which is now the vault of heaven. All the ancient cosmogonies are in agreement on this point. It is stated, for instance, in the Egyptian cosmogony, that the sun rose from the waters and that a shaft of light created a fissure in the mass of matter, which separated the heavens from the earth. I'll read that again. It is stated in the Egyptian cosmogony that the sun rose from the waters and that a shaft of light created a fissure in the mass of matter, which separated the heavens from the earth. It may also be assumed that the weight of the bulk of the waters helped to cause the downfall, or perhaps a succession of vibratory shocks. The dislocation of the earth may not have taken place instantaneously in one block. It must have continued from place to place, sometimes with difficulty, over a period of several years. Hesiod, in his history of the War of the Titans signifying the mountains against the vault of heaven, has left us a striking picture of what must have been the birth of the earth, or at least one of its phases. He describes the heavens falling from their height and shaking the earth on its base, crushing the bold Titans under enormous blocks of burning rock, the terrifying fracas of the thunder, the flashes of lightning, the fire consuming the earth and emitting suffocating vapors and a blazing atmosphere. It could be added, the prodigious masses of water falling in cataracts from the depths of heaven onto the earth. Hesiod states that the revolt of the Titans, that is to say the length of time taken by the dislocation, lasted 10 years. It is even probable that for a long time afterwards parts of the vault must have crashed from time to time, before its final consolidation. It may be said that mountains did not result from volcanic upheavals, but that they were released in that shape, including summits and peaks, from the depths of heaven. Thus, the mountains of the earth find their counterparts in the valleys of the vault of the sky, and vice versa. In the same way, the deep and wide circular depressions which have been discovered sometimes at very high altitudes, and which are filled with water either from atmospheric condensation or rain, and appear to be lakes, have not been hollowed out, as it is assumed, by the fall of gigantic meteorites, of which no traces can be found, but are indeed natural formations which result from the dislocation in the mounts or circular eminences which exist in the vault and are their counterparts. The megalithic blocks, including the extraordinary specimens found in the Easter Islands, are also natural rock formations, the upper parts of which happen to be freed from or broken off the mass of the vault at the moment of the dislocation, while their lower parts remain buried in the earth. The flat horizontal stones called dolmens, which are laid on vertical stone supports, thus forming tables, have also been released in these particular arrangements from the vault of the sky. The megalithic blocks were never erected by man, nor were they either transported from one place to another. They were, however, fashioned, shaped, and even cemented in situ by the hand of man to serve for religious and burial purposes. Their geometrical and symmetrical disposition is just a fact of nature. The pyramid must have originally been a single block of rock released in that shape from the vault of the sky, since it can be observed that quite a number of mountain summits affect this same shape, and it may have been imitated by the Egyptians in view of its unusual appearance. There has been no addition whatsoever to the layers which constitute the Earth's crust since the beginning. They all date naturally from the dislocation, although volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and inundations may have caused some upheavals and shifting of the original layers. A transformation of the primary constituent resulting from the action of the vault may have also occurred through the ages, particularly in the case of coal, petrol, ores, and precious stones. The evolution of the earth was accomplished in several periods of time, of undetermined duration, which correspond to the days of Genesis. But this evolution has always resulted from the influences of the cosmic radiation which proceed from the vault, such as they are transmitted by the satellite disks of the Earth. These may not either have appeared all at the same time, and their successive formations may have contributed to a large extent to the evolution of the Earth, which, from a certain period, became exteriorized through the appearance of vegetation, animal species, human races, and their various degrees of civilization. It is impossible to speak with certainty of the different ages which have followed the dislocation of the Earth. Neither is it possible to estimate correctly their duration, but certain divisions may be established. In the first place, it may be remarked that the age of the Earth does not run into millions of years. We may in fact consider that once the initial vital impulse was imparted, the Earth's evolution was accomplished in a comparatively short span of time, but that it is rather the separation of our universe from the amorphous chaos, its slow preparation and organization, and also the descent of the cosmic scheme into matter, which must have previously required an infinite length of time. It is stated in Nordic mythology that the Earth floated on the waters during 700 years, but this period of stabilization must have been much longer and taken at least 2,000 years, and even after its final consolidation, the Earth must have been subjected to periodical cataclysms, resulting from seismic shocks and submersion by water, but not volcanic eruptions, since the internal fire of the Earth may only have been in an early smoldering stage at this time. It would be interesting to know in this connection how this fire in the center of the Earth started at the beginning. It may have originated from a spontaneous ignition produced by the impact of burning rocks from heaven, or even lightning. But the fact of its existing in the interior of the Earth may point to a natural slow combustion of matter, in which, however, vegetation could not have played a part. This period of consolidation was followed by a transitional era. It is stated in very early texts that there was no retrogradation at the beginning of time, which means that the satellite disks of the Earth which are subject to this motion had not yet made their appearance in the heavens, and that only the sun and the moon existed, since their motion is always direct. The other disks, up to and including Saturn, which all retrograde, may have started to appear successively a few hundred years after the dislocation of the Earth. It is also said that the inclination of the Earth did not exist, and that there were no eclipses. This early transitional period must have lasted a considerable time, and its duration be estimated at about 10,000 years. The next great event in the evolution of the Earth was its inclination. It is said in some Oriental cosmogonies that one of the pillars supporting the Earth collapsed and made it lean in a southwesterly direction, while the heavens were then said to incline towards the northeast. We may consider that such an upheaval did really occur, as several Greek authors have recorded a tradition existing among very ancient people that a tremendous commotion shook the foundations of the Earth at a very remote time. Anaxagoras, who lived in the 5th century BC, was of opinion that the inclination of the Earth was of a fairly recent date, but it must have occurred much earlier than he thought, and could be situated at 7,000 years BC. Taking into consideration the 2,000 years which have elapsed since the Christian era, the actual age of the Earth since the dislocation would be 21,000 years, which means that since the beginning the Sun has risen over 7.5 million times over the Earth, a staggering figure. The age of the substance of the Earth itself, considered as part of the original mass of matter, is evidently impossible to estimate. Anaxagoras also stated that vegetation, animal species, and the human races had already appeared on the Earth before its inclination. Nothing can be presumed, as well may be realized on this question. The creation may have necessitated lengthy periods of time. On the other hand, it is possible that all could have appeared in the space of a few months, depending on the intensity of the creative forces, the effects of the disks, the suitable climatic conditions, and the time of the year. But there must certainly have been numerous cases of spontaneous generation. It may be estimated that the human and animal skeletons called prehistoric, and also the mural art of the cave age men, are not more than 4,000 to 5,000 years old, if they are that. After its inclination, the Earth must have passed through several stages, the exact nature of which is impossible to ascertain, but which are made evident by their repercussion on the progress of civilization in all of its forms, particularly in the religious plane. The beginning of the Christian era, nearly 2,000 years ago, certainly corresponds to a physical evolution of the earth, and there are actually, however, precursory signs of the advent of a new age, that of atomic energy, which should also be interpreted as another step in the evolution of the earth itself, and which, like the preceding eras, will bring in its train new reactions in the fields of religion, ideology, culture, science, and human society, the effects of which seem already to be perceptible. The flying saucers, which seem to have recently become habitual features of the heavens, may well relate to the formation at an early stage of new satellite disks of the earth. As to the end of the world, one of the perils to be faced would be the failure of the disks, particularly the sun. The strength and solidity of the vault may be held to be absolutely secure, and its downfall upon the earth should not be anticipated as our forebears used to fear, although the inertia of its surface or the disappearance of its reflecting power would prove calamitous. But barring celestial or geological disasters of any sort, we must realize that all life on the earth might, and perhaps much sooner than could be expected, be completely wiped out by accident, by the dangerous and powerful energies which are now being released in different parts of the world, especially taking into consideration the relatively small space in which the earth is confined. A question arises. In the case of total destruction of life, would there be a revival on earth after a certain interval of time? We might think so, and in the same pattern, since the great creative forces of the vault of heaven are said to be unchangeable, constantly active, and also immortal.
Hi guys, welcome to the Flatwater. What we're going to be looking at today is some work again by Zetetic Astronomy, The Bible of Flat Earth by Parallax or Samuel Burley Robotham, Earth Not a Globe. What we're looking at today is the actual age of the Earth. So, you know, you might think that this is quite a large topic, quite a important thing to look at. So, you know, this is a pretty big deal, this information. If what I'm about to read you is true, I think that, well, it's one of the most important pieces of scientific information that's ever been generated. So what I'm doing here is I'm just locating this part of the file that we want to look at. Because the sun and the moon rotate above the Earth's surface, they're, just by the mere fact of the way that this system is functioning, we're able to draw some conclusions about the age of the Earth that would normally be very difficult to find out, if not impossible. It'd be impossible to solve this problem. So, just give me a moment here, I'm going to try to find the rest. So, the age of the Earth. We're going to be talking about the age of the Earth. Normally, for any number of reasons, finding out the age of the Earth is extremely difficult. One way that science has attempted to try to do this through geology or other processes is through attempting to date rocks and other natural phenomena, trying to guess their ages from how long they assume or how long that they figure that something ages at, by figuring out the time it takes for a process to occur, like making coal, and then how much of that process there is, and they add up those numbers and you can come out with some rough guesstimates. Or by taking ice core sampling or core sampling from rocks deep down in the earth. Other examples exist out there of ways that have been attempted to age the earth, but none of them have been reliable. None of them have been even anywhere close, I think, to coming anywhere near the truth of the matter. So
We're going to be looking at Zetetic Astronomy today by Parallax Samuel Burley Rowbotham. Chapter 7. The sun's path expands and contracts daily for 6 months alternately. This is a matter of absolute certainty, proved by what is called in technical language the northern and southern declination, which is simply saying that the sun's path is nearest the polar center in summer and farthest away from it in winter. At noon on the 21st of any December, let a rod be so fixed that on looking along it, the line of sight touches the lower edge of the sun. For several days, this line of sight will continue nearly the same, showing that the sun's path for this period is little changed. But on the 9th or 10th day to touch the sun's lower edge, the rod will have to be lifted several degrees towards the zenith. Every day afterwards, until the 22nd of June, the rod will have to be raised. On that date, there will again be several days without any visible change, after which, day by day, the rod must be lowered until the 21st December. In this simple way, it may be demonstrated that the sun's path gets larger every day from December 21st to June 22nd, and smaller every day from June 22nd to December 21st of every year. From a number of observations made by the author during the last 25 years, it is certain that both the minimum, or June path of the sun, and maximum, or December path, have been gradually getting farther from the northern center. The amount of expansion is very small, but easily detected. And if it has been going on for centuries, which seems consistent with known phenomena, it explains at once and perfectly the fact that England, as well as more northern latitudes, have once been tropical. There is abundant evidence that the conditions and productions now found within the tropics have once existed in the northern region, which is now so cold and desolate and inimical to ordinary animal and vegetable life. Hence, it is a proper and logical conclusion that the sun's path was once very near to the Earth's Arctic or polar center. The following diagram, figure 60, will show the sun's peculiar path. N represents the polar center. A, the sun in its path in June, which daily expands like the coils of the mainspring of a watch, until it reaches the outer and larger path B in December, after which the path gradually and day by day contracts until it again becomes the path A on the 21st of June. That such is the sun's annual course is demonstrable by actual observation, but if it is asked why it traverses such a peculiarly concentric path, no practical answer can be given, and no theory or speculation can be tolerated. At no distant period, perhaps, we may have collected sufficient matter-of-fact evidence to enable us to understand it, but until that occurs, the zetetic process only permits us to say, the peculiar motion is visible to us, but of the cause, at present, we are ignorant. So I thought that was a really interesting article, a really interesting portion of zetetic astronomy. So the portion that I'd like to focus on here is just before the diagram. From a number of observations made by the author during the last 25 years, it's certain that both the minimum, or June path of the sun, and maximum, or December path, have been gradually getting farther from northern center. The amount of expansion is very small but easily detected, and if it's been going on for centuries, which seems consistent, it explains at once and perfectly the fact that England, as well as more northern latitudes, have once been tropical. There is abundant evidence that the conditions and productions now found within the tropics have once existed in the northern region, which is now so cold and desolate, and inimical to ordinary animal and vegetable life. So what he's saying there is that in the past, the sun's path was much, much tighter around the northern pole. That because the sun is continuing to expand its arc every year by a tiny amount, that we can consider that if we take that amount and track it back, then we can surmise and assume that at some point the sun stayed very close to the northern pole. So why this is extremely crazy and extremely important information is because if we can figure out the amount that change is occurring, that the sun is continuing to extend its distance every year, if we can figure out that amount, we can track it back. And by doing so, we could get a rough guesstimate or date for how long the Earth has been here, or at least how long the sun has been continuing its path, continuing to expand its path. So, wouldn't it be funny if we figured out from the amount that it changes every year and we tracked it back that it came out to, say, I don't know, 5,000 to 7,000 years? It's pretty interesting information, to say the least. Okay, I'll just leave you guys with that. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Ciao. Hey guys, this is Flatwater. Thanks for watching my movie. I'll see you guys at my YouTube channel, which is Flatwater at YouTube. I'll see you soon. Ciao. So welcome back to Flat Water and Flat Earth. What I'm talking about today is the tides. The mainstream definition and explanation for tides are that they're caused by the moon and the moon's passage around the Earth. The mainstream model says that the moon is pulling on the water and causing the tides. However, we see that the mainstream model fails miserably in describing and creating the phenomenon of the tides. Their explanation is sorely lacking. What we see is that the time cycle of the moon moving and the tides are absolutely not linked. They are not related whatsoever. And so what we see is that the cycle of the moon moving over the Earth has nothing to do with and is not linked whatsoever with the tides. So it's puzzled man for thousands of years just what is causing the tides. And I think that with the recent discoveries that have been made and some of the pieces that we've put together here, that we can now come to the conclusion and find the obvious logic in that the tides are made by the in-sucking seas of the North Pole. This is not necessarily the only place that the Earth would intake water to create the tides. What this is linked to is the cosmic breath streams that were discussed in Heaven and Earth. So I'll read from them now. On the non-revolution of the Earth round the Sun, and on the existence of a summer and of a winter cosmic breath stream. From Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. Copernicus put forward the hypothesis of the revolution of the Earth round the Sun in order to explain the cycle of the seasons. His theory is not very satisfactory, seeing that the Earth is supposed to be at its greatest distance from the Sun in the summer during the hot weather, and at its shortest distance in the winter when the temperature is at its lowest. These unusual conditions, which clearly contradict the laws of nature as regards the effect of heat, are, it is said, due to the angle formed by the rays of the sun as they fall on the Earth's surface. It is also stated that the opposition of the seasons north and south of the equator is due to a tilt of the Earth, first on one side and then on the other, which conveniently occurs at the right moment. Nothing is said, however, of the shifting of the waters of the sea and rivers which this change in the center of gravity and in the position of the Earth would inevitably bring twice a year. It might also be assumed that under those conditions, very high constructions would swerve from the vertical. The American skyscrapers and the Eiffel Tower, for instance, cannot be seen to lean right or left according to the seasons, although this should be a logical and natural consequence of the alternate inclination attributed to the Earth. It must reasonably be said that the circumstances which readily explain in the most extraordinary and unlikely way the cause of the seasons are not credible, especially in view of the fact that Copernicus, when he published his theories on the movement of the Earth in his treatise on the revolution of the celestial spheres in 1543, insisted on their purely hypothetical nature. He said, The hypothesis of the movement of the Earth is only one which is useful to explain phenomena, but it should not be considered as an absolute truth. It was never his intention, it seems, that his theory should be taken in earnest by his successors. The motion of the Earth in space can be disproved by a comparison between the supposed speed of the Earth and that of the other planets. If we base our considerations on the principle that a body in motion creates an apparent speed equal to its own in bodies it encounters, which is usually demonstrated by the experiment of a moving vehicle such as a train, it is difficult to judge at first sight whether it's the train or what can be seen outside it which is moving away. But one fact is certain, that the two speeds, one of which is real and the other is apparent, are equal. For this reason, if the Earth were in motion, it would create in the planets and constellations an initial apparent speed equal to its own. Consequently, there can be no speed in the heavens lower than that of the Earth, since it represents a basic speed from which the apparent motions would be derived. But as it can be seen, the displacement of the constellations and of the planets, with the exception of Mercury and Venus, is slower than the supposed speed of the Earth, which under the circumstances stated above is a material impossibility. It should, moreover, be considered that the real speeds of the planets have to be added to the apparent motions created by the supposed movement of the Earth, with the result that the planets ought to pass before us like a flash of lightning. The absence of these mathematical circumstances, which surely have no reason to be invisible, ought to be sufficient to prove that the hypothesis of the revolution of the Earth round the Sun, as put forward by Copernicus, has no basis in fact and is not admissible, even if such theory could not be replaced by anything more logical, as it is. An entirely different and more rational explanation of the cycle of the seasons, based on a reasoned investigation of existing conditions, can, however, be given, so that it will no longer be necessary to send the Earth traveling into space to this end. The essential feature of the year is its division into two equal periods of 6 months, based first on the predominating length of the days over that of the nights, and vice versa. Conditions which are governed by the varying hours of sunrise and sunset, and secondly, by either high or low height reached by the sun in the heavens at midday. The first cycle, during which the days are longer than the nights and the sun reaches its culminating point of the year, extends from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, i.e. March 21 to September 22, and the second cycle, during which, inversely, the duration of the nights exceeds that of the days, and the sun descends to its lowest point of the year, extends from the autumn equinox to the spring equinox, i.e. September 23 to March 20. These two 6-month periods are also characterized by an opposition of temperature. During the first cycle, which corresponds to spring and summer, the heat gradually rises and falls, while during the second cycle, which comprises autumn and winter, it is the intensity of the cold which progressively increases and decreases. It might be said that it is evident that the heat of the summer and the low temperatures of the winter result from either the high or low heat reached by the sun at midday, and also from the alternate predominating length of the days over the nights. Although it might not be absolutely certain that the variations of temperature are entirely due to these particular circumstances. To what reason must be attributed the variations which exist in regard to the sun's daily height and the hours at which it rises and sets, which seem to determine the various temperatures of the year? These regular fluctuations must necessarily have an origin, and it might be remarked that no scientific research or speculation has ever been attempted in this direction. The sun has been compared by the ancients to a chariot drawn by steeds and to a boat manned by rowers, meaning by this that it is not self-propelled. Its movement, therefore, is derived from some external power, and in that case it would appear that the variations in the height of the sun and its hours of rising and setting are due to the passage and to the impulsion of two regular successive currents, or cosmic breath streams, of 6 months each, i.e. a warm increasing and decreasing breath stream prevailing from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, followed by a cold, increasing and decreasing breath stream from autumn to spring. And the conclusion is that the impulse of these two summer and winter cosmic breaths govern the height of the sun, and that they also have the effect of either advancing or retarding the hours of sunrise and sunset, on which depend the respective lengths of days and nights. So it's interesting to note here that it may not be that the cosmic breath streams are governing the height of the sun, but they may be a function of the height of the sun. It is therefore the arrival and growing intensity of the warm summer breath stream which from March 21 causes the sun to gradually ascend to its culminating point of the year at the June solstice. and the decreasing intensity of the same warm stream which, after the solstice, causes the height of the sun to decline steadily until 22 September, the moment of the equinox, when the cold current sets in. At the same time, the impulse of this warm cosmic stream has the effect of advancing the hour of sunrise and retarding that of sunset, so that the days become longer than the nights. On the other hand, it is the arrival and growing intensity of the cold winter breath stream about the 23rd September, which causes the sun to further descend to its lowest point of the year at December solstice, and the decreasing intensity of this cold breath which, after the winter solstice, causes the sun to rise again until 21 March, when the warm breath takes over. At the same time, the cold current has the effect of retarding the hour of sunrise and of advancing the sunset, whereby nights become longer than the days. As it can be seen, these two semi-annual cosmic streams or currents, warm and cold, each represent a complete breath comprising a rising phase of inspiration from the equinox to the solstice, and a following phase of expiration from the solstice to the following equinox. And it's these two double phases of a duration of 3 months each, controlling the daily height of the sun and the hours of its rising and setting, which causes the 4 seasons. It may be explained that the principle of the existence of cosmic breaths is not new, and that it is to be found in the cosmogonies of the Orient. It has, here in particular, been borrowed from a French translation of Hindu texts in which the movement of the sun was said to respond to the influence of universal streams of breath. The author has adapted this theory to existing circumstances, thus permitting the specific respiratory nature of these cosmic breaths to be discovered. This fact is completely demonstrated apart from the obvious parallel of the phases of inspiration and expiration rhythmically governing the lengths of days and nights and the height of the sun, by a comparison with another factor, which is the pause existing between inspiration and expiration. This pause is precisely reproduced by the solstice, which corresponds to the stoppage of the cosmic breath between the two phases. The existence of a breath governing the movement of the sun becomes here manifest, since the height of the latter at midday does not vary during the solstice interval, nor do the hours of its rising and setting. The respective lengths of the day and of the night remain unchanged, the sun rising and setting at the same hours for no less than 5 days. It could be added, as further proof of the existence of a cosmic breath, that the high temperatures of July and August, which are really abnormal, since it should be cooler as they occur when the days become shorter and the height of the sun decreases, that they are due, in fact, as in the function of respiration, the pressure of the breathing out is greater towards the middle of the expiration phase, and consequently the temperature rises. On the other hand, it is observed that the cold becomes more intense in January and February, although the days are growing longer and the decrease in the intensity of the cold breath is causing the sun to rise. This recrudescence of the cold is due to the same reason of pressure increase in the middle of the phase of expiration, and the cosmic breath being cold, it follows that there is a further drop of temperature during this period, from which it can be seen that the pressure of the respective cosmic breath streams is susceptible of warming or cooling in the atmosphere, as the case may be, regardless of the height of the sun. It may be remarked that during the time of the solstices, when the height of the sun at midday is stabilized for a few days, either at its highest or lowest point in the heavens, man, by reflex, follows the cosmic conditions by stopping his working activities and taking a rest in fall. These particular moments are also the occasion of great religious Christic festivals, Christmas at the winter solstice and Corpus Christi at the time of the summer solstice, which points undoubtedly to the existence of an association between the sun and Christ. This association exists also in the case of the Easter festival of the resurrection of Christ, which in reality celebrates the solar new year. Easter takes place on the Sunday following the new moon, after the spring equinox on March 21, which date marks the beginning of the spring and summer cycle of the sun, when the height of the latter at noon begins to rise over the equator according to the actual astronomical way of reckoning the solar declination. It is also obvious that the opposition of the seasons north and south of the equator result from a corresponding opposition in the circulation of the two breaths round the earth, i.e. when the warm breath is in the northern hemisphere, the cold one is in the other, and vice versa, so that it is simultaneously summer in one part of the world and winter in the other. Thus, the warm 6-month breath, which commenced in the northern hemisphere at the spring equinox, comes to an end at the autumn equinox, about the 22nd of September, when the transposition of the warm and cold breath takes place. The warm breath passes in the southern hemisphere for the spring-summer cycle, and at the same time the cold breath leaving said hemisphere enters ours for the autumn-winter cycle. The respective intensities of the two breaths, both at the end of their expiration phase at the moment, are, thus, equalized, so as to permit their transposition. And at the same time, the lengths of the day and night find themselves also equalized to 12 hours each in both hemispheres. It is also most probable that the atmospheric disturbances which prevail at the time of the equinoxes are due to the mutual replacement of the breaths, and to their passage in a different part of the world. It should be added, however, that in the above theory concerning the cycle of the seasons, the cosmic breaths do not act directly on the sun, but that there are intermediate circumstances which will be dealt with later on with regard to the origin itself of the sun. Okay, so coming back from that, from the cosmic breath streams, we can see how it's a great description, and we can see how it works very easily and makes sense to some extent. Obviously, some of the working factors of it would still need to be worked out. So what I think is happening, or a possible part of this, is, as you see here, I'm showing you this. This is the weather patterns over the Earth. See how on the outside here, which would be the southern latitudes, it's moving in this direction, but in what we call the northern latitudes, really the central latitude, the central ring of the Earth, we see that the weather is moving in this direction. It's moving the opposite way. So this again ties in with those breath streams that she's talking about. And it's interesting, if you look at the four corners of the Earth like this, and we think of the four cosmic breath streams, you could see how if they were blowing from this way, from these two directions, east and, well, okay, let's just call it left and right, and if it was blowing in those directions at different altitudes, and then it was blowing in these directions from north and south here, or top, up and down, top and bottom of the picture, that if the breath was being pushed from there, also from different altitudes, what you would create is sort of this toroidal vortex of air in the center. And you see how that would create the four winds, but also see how they're moving in opposite directions in the north and the south here. It's very hard to explain how that would work, unless if you look at and consider that the dome itself would possibly be separated here, and that one part of the dome, or one portion, is moving in this direction and one is moving in the other. And it would also, if you think about pumps and you think about pneumatics and how to move air, if you have two pieces of glass like that with some sort of a buffer in between them, or an airtight seal in between them, and as you turn it, you would create suction and pressure, which could create the forces of the wind that we're looking at and talking about. So just lots more interesting stuff to look at that makes more sense to me for our flat Earth model, and makes much more sense to me than obviously the globe model, which is ludicrous, ridiculous. So I hope you guys can see how that ties in there, that the glass, or that would make the pump action to create these cosmic breath streams. So after that is created, after it creates the breath streams, that the water cycles on Earth will be a similar, not similar, but that it would run on the same principles and at the same timings, that it would be interlinked and correlated as far as timing. So the water would be part of this action of suction and the action of moving the air. So as the water is drawn into the whirlpool at the North Pole here, this gigantic whirlpool,
And as it circles around Mount Meru and plunges down into the depths of the earth, that would create that suction and pull the air towards that area. And then other air would have to come in from the outside or from the other parts of the planisphere to fill in and make up for the diffusion and make up for the loss of that sucked air that's going in at the north here. So what we see on flat Earth and in reality is that diffusion and particle physics are really the theories and the physics that work on our physical plane. Particle theory and particle physics over many years has been shown to be the true functioning of atomic theory. When you take a candle and light it, what you see is that the hot air rises and that cool air is sucked in at the base of the candle to fill in for where that hot air is being ejected or being raised. And that creates a quick, simple convection current. And we see this every day in all of our lives, in everything that we do. Particle diffusion, moving from high to low density, is how the world works. This is how the atmosphere works. This is how things actually work. And this is why, and explains how, rocketry and the true physics that are involved in spaceflight come into play. Because diffusion rules on flat Earth. When you get up to that altitude and there are no more particles to suck in or blow through a jet or to propel yourself off of from a rocket, because there are no particles there, you therefore have no push from the rocket. You have no propulsion because there is nothing to propulse yourself or propel yourself off of. So to summarize, and in conclusion, this is how the tides actually work. They're not pulled by the moon. They're not pulled by magnetism. It's the cosmic cycles that the Earth does with itself, with the dome, air particle diffusion, the water movement, and suction, and pneumatics. And this is how the tides actually function. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you soon. Ciao. Chapter 12, on the function of the Earth and the universe, and on volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. If we try to discover the function of the Earth and the universe, the first thing to be noticed is this manifestation of life. The Earth is not a cold mass without any reflexes. There is, firstly, the all-important factor of its internal fire, the incessant activity of which is made evident by volcanic eruptions. There are also other symptoms of animation, such as earthquakes, tides, and winds. It should also be borne in mind that if life in all its forms is extant on the Earth, it is only because it is part and parcel of the living body of the Earth itself. It follows that the only interpretation that could possibly be assigned to the Earth in view of the evidence of life is an organic one, a parallel of which could be found in the human body. If the different parts of the human body and their functions are examined, the most consistent relationship which is immediately apparent is that which exists between the heart and the Earth. In the first place, there are the volcanoes, which represent the apertures through which the blood is assumed to leave the heart and pass into the blood vessels. Furthermore, we have the volcanic eruptions, which correspond to the expulsion of the blood. Another important point of resemblance is the inclination of the Earth towards the left, which reproduces the slant of the heart in this direction. Under the circumstances, the volcanic eruptions and the earthquakes would appear to represent cardiac phenomena,
and to have a connection with movements of expansion and contraction. The volcanic eruptions resulting in the expulsion of a certain quantity of fiery matter from the center of the Earth would correspond to the expansion, and the earthquakes, causing cracks and disturbances on the crust of the Earth, would represent the contraction. It is also almost certain that the loud subterranean rumblings which accompany volcanic eruptions and earthquakes correspond to the sounds which are peculiar to the heart. An objection which could be raised at this point against the analogy which has been established between the heart and the Earth, and has so far been consistent, is in connection with the presence of the circulating element which is the blood, and is supposed to circulate and pass through the heart. This fact would imply parallel conditions in the case of the Earth, and these conditions do not exist. But the circulation of the blood could be disclaimed, seeing that it cannot be proved, as it is impossible to know exactly what the conditions are in the heart in vivo, and also that the circulation, by means of X-rays, cannot be seen to exist. It would rather appear that the blood is immobilized in the heart, veins, and arteries in the same way as the marrow is enclosed in the bones, and the similarity of the arrangement seems to confirm this view. It should also be considered that it is a material impossibility for 1 3/4 pints of blood to pass every 10 seconds, as it is said, through the heart, which is the size of a man's fist. The speed of the blood, given as 50 centimeters per second, is also difficult to accept. Furthermore, it has been calculated that the speed is reduced to 5 millimeters per second in the capillaries. But since the volume of the blood which is said to issue from the heart is so constant, it is obvious that if it circulates rapidly when leaving this organ, it cannot continue its assumed circuit at a considerably reduced speed in the capillaries without causing an obstruction resulting in an immediate blockage of circulation. It is also evident that if there is no communication between the two halves of the heart, there cannot be any communication between the capillaries to permit circulation. This points to the existence of two independent and opposite systems or networks of blood vessels. The valves, which are found in the veins, have nothing to do with circulating the blood. Their function would be to support the weight of the venous blood, which is heavy, and to keep it in place, particularly if the body is erect. The ancient Greek physicians thought that a kind of subtle air or spirit was transported by the blood in the arteries and veins, and it could be added that this subtle air may correspond to the cosmic breath streams mentioned previously. The breath of day in the arteries and the night breath in the veins. Consequently, once the obstacle of the supposed circulation of the blood is removed, the analogy between the heart and the earth appears to be complete. Taking into consideration the fact that this analogy is only an assumption, and also that the preceding remarks are only brought forward for the purpose of endeavoring to support the same. Chapter 13. Is the earth the heart of a gigantic man world? It has been said that the universe is an organic body, exactly like the human body, and that the interior, that is the hollow part of the body of man, is and should be interpreted as the space between the stars and the earth. We have also previously seen in this connection that there appears to be an analogy between the earth and the heart. Not only do they form and are formulated by the same letters in a different order, we may further consider the text of the first chapter of Genesis, according to which Jehovah took one of Adam's ribs and made it into a woman. This does not mean that the female human body was evolved from a supplementary bone of the males, but refers to the creation of the earth, the name of which is Eve, such as it became detached from the principal mass of matter, Adam, which means man, in the neighborhood of the thorax, which is formed by the ribs. Eve handing an apple to a man and inviting him to eat it is merely the symbol of the earth feeding humanity. The serpent is the representation of a hunger, which tempts man to take food, and is further a representation of the spinal column and of man's chakra points. And it also contains the heart. The serpent is a representation of hunger, which tempts man to take food, and also contains the heart. Thus, the earth may well be the heart of a gigantic man world, possessing the characteristics of the human body, which is the universal prototype, and which would be composed of the same elements as the earth itself, i.e. the substance of the earth proper, as well as minerals, metal, stones, and rocks, and would also contain water, as reference is often made in ancient cosmogonies to the superior waters which exist on the other side of the vault of heaven. It may also be noted that the Bible states that we are made in His image, and His image may indeed be the universe in the shape of a man. On the other hand, air and fire might be particular to the earth. It is possible to calculate the height of the man world, which would shelter the earth, since the circumference of the latter, which is to be taken now as a flat expanse, is said to be 39,840 kilometers, and that the dimension of the heart is approximately 1/13 of that of the body, and this would give us the figure of 517,920 kilometers, which, after all, does not seem so absolutely inconceivable compared to the immensities to which we have recently been accustomed. Finally, one must confess that the intelligence of man will forever be defeated by the problems of the reason of the existence of the cosmos, of its shape and the method of organization, its probable magnitude, antiquity, and duration, and particularly its mode of support. Logic and imagination remain powerless in defiance of these unfathomable mysteries. 1938 to 1956, by Gabrielle Henriette.
So